You arrive at the small stone office just as the first pale light spreads across the eastern hills, a light that is less a colour than a gradual thinning of the darkness, turning the sky from deep charcoal to a soft washed grey. The street you walk along is empty at this hour, the cobbles still holding the coolness of night, and your sandals make a quiet scuffing sound that echoes briefly between the low walls. The door of the office stands before you, made of oiled oak with iron bands running across it in 3 horizontal lines, each studded with square-headed nails that have darkened over years of exposure to damp and sun. You take the iron key from the pouch at your belt, a key that is heavy for its size, shaped like an L with a bit of complex teeth, and you feel the chill of the metal against your fingers. The lock is stiff from the night's cold, and you must turn the key with a slow, steady pressure until you hear the quiet click of the mechanism releasing, a sound that is both final and small, like a pebble dropping into still water. You push the door open, and it swings inward on brass hinges that give a low murmur of protest before falling silent. The air inside the office is still, holding the faint scent of old dust, dried papyrus, and the metallic breath of bronze coins that have been stored overnight in the strongbox. There is also a trace of olive oil from the lamp you extinguished the evening before, a smell that is almost sweet and slightly green. You step onto the worn flagstones, each one slightly uneven, polished smooth in the center from countless footsteps over countless days. The room is not large, but it feels spacious in the dimness, with its plastered walls the color of pale sand and a high ceiling crossed by dark wooden beams. You cross to the wooden shutters that cover the single window, a window that faces east to catch the morning. The iron bar that holds them closed is cold and slightly rough under your hand, and you lift it from its brackets, setting it carefully on the stone sill. Then you swing the shutters open one by one, and the soft morning enters, bringing with it the distant murmur of the provincial town beginning to wake. The light that now fills the room is gentle and diffuse, revealing the simple furnishings that will accompany your day, the heavy wooden table that serves as your desk, the stool with its seat polished by years of use, the shelves set into the wall holding rolls of papyrus and stacks of wax tablets, and in the corner, the iron-banded strongbox that waits beneath the table. A few sparrows chatter in the eaves above the colonnade outside, their voices a series of brief high notes that repeat without pattern. Somewhere beyond the basilica, a cart rumbles slowly over cobbles, the wooden wheels making a low grinding sound that rises and falls and then fades. You stand for a moment by the opened window, letting the cool air brush against your face, and you notice the way the first direct ray of sun touches the far wall and makes the plaster glow a warmer shade. On your desk, the clay lamp waits where you left it, its wick curled like a sleeping insect, the reservoir still holding a small pool of olive oil that looks nearly black in the low light. You take the flint and steel from the niche beside the lamp, small objects that fit neatly in the palm, the flint, a dark grey stone, with sharp edges, and the steel, a curved piece of iron, worn smooth where your thumb rests. Striking them together produces a brief shower of sparks, tiny points of orange that vanish almost before they are born, and after a few attempts, one spark catches in the charred linen of the wick. You touch the flame to the oil, and a small, steady glow pushes back the shadows, the light trembling slightly as the oil feeds the flame. The lamp is a simple terracotta shape, unglazed, with a small handle shaped like a loop, and the flame rises from the spout in a spear of yellow that is topped by a thin thread of dark smoke. You adjust the wick with a bronze pick, pulling it a little higher so the flame strengthens and the room becomes immediately more habitable, the corners retreating into a softer darkness. You open the heavy ledger that lies on the desk, a codex of bound wax tablets held together by leather thongs, threaded through holes drilled in the wooden frames. The cover is of plain beechwood, darkened along the edges where hands have held it, and when you lift it the wax pages inside appear a pale cream color, smooth and slightly shiny, carrying the faint impressions of yesterday's writing. You run a thumb along the groove where the stylus rests, a narrow channel cut into the wooden frame, and you feel the cool smoothness of the wax that fills the recessed panels. The stylus itself is bronze, about the length of your hand, with a pointed end for writing and a flat spatulate end for smoothing the wax when corrections are needed. It fits into your grip the way a familiar tool always does, its weight balanced between the two ends. The first task of the day, a task that has become so routine it feels like a small ceremony, is to prepare the counting table. You pour fresh water from the clay jug into a bronze bowl, the water making a hollow sound as it strikes the metal, and you dip a square of clean cloth into the water, wringing it out so it is damp but not dripping. The counting table is a section of the larger desk, an area of bare wood that has been worn by thousands of coins sliding across its surface, leaving it smooth as polished stone. You wipe the wood in slow circular motions, removing the fine layer of dust that settled overnight, and you notice how the damp cloth darkens the grain before the water evaporates in the dry air. The smell of wet wood mixes briefly with the other scents in the room, a clean, earthy smell that fades quickly. You set the cloth aside to dry on the stone sill. From the cupboard built into the wall you lift the pan balance, carrying it with both hands because it is a delicate instrument, despite its solid construction. The balance consists of a bronze beam suspended from a central pillar on a small tripod base, with two shallow pans hanging from fine chains at either end. You set it on the counting table so that the pillar stands exactly over the scratch mark that indicates the level spot, a mark you made long ago with the point of a nail and that has since been darkened by years of aligning the balance in the same position. The pans swing very slightly when disturbed, their chains whispering against each other, and then they settle into stillness, one a fraction higher than the other, until you make the final adjustments. Next you arrange the little linen bags of coin weights, each one sewn shut around a precise measure of bronze or lead, with the value stamped on the fabric in faded ink. There is a weight for a single scripulum, another for two, another for a sextula, and so on up through the denominations you use in daily counting. The bags are soft from handling, their seams double-stitched with linen thread, and they make a faint rustling sound as you place them in a neat row beside the balance. You test the scale with a blank copper disc that you keep for this purpose, placing it first in one pan and then the other, adding the smallest weight until the needle, a thin rod that projects from the top of the beam, settles exactly on the scratch mark that means true. The needle moves with a fluid slowness, its motion gradually diminishing until it hovers motionless over the line. Watching the balance find its equilibrium is a quiet satisfaction that never quite loses its small pleasure. The oil in the lamp has warmed now, and the smell of it has shifted to something richer, more full, a scent that blends with the earthy coolness of the stone walls and the faint odor of the tallow that seals the ends of the papyrus rolls. Outside a dog barks twice and then falls silent, and the cart you heard earlier has moved on, leaving only the distant sound of a rooster crowing from somewhere near the market square. The town is waking fully now, but the sounds remain muted by the thick walls of the office, arriving as a low composite hum that forms a kind of background quiet rather than a disturbance. You sit on the wooden stool, the seat cupping you slightly after so many years of use, the edges rounded and smooth. For a long moment you simply listen to the building settle around you, a faint creak in the rafters where the roof beams adjust to the warmth of the rising sun, the soft ticking of cooling tiles that had contracted during the night and now expand again. You notice the way the lamp flame bends very slightly in a draught you cannot feel, straightening again with a small flutter that makes the shadows on the wall twitch once and then return to stillness. There is no hurry in this moment, no need to begin at any particular instant. The day will fill itself with tasks soon enough, and for now it is enough to sit and let the morning light strengthen and the room warm by degrees. You open the ledger to a fresh page, the wax pale and smooth like cream that has not yet been disturbed. The wooden frames of the tablets are bound so that the book opens flat, and you smooth the wax with the flat end of the stylus to ensure it is even, working from the center outward in long, gentle strokes. The wax yields under the bronze with a faint, greasy resistance, and the surface becomes slightly glossy where the metal passes. When the page is ready, you take up the stylus with the pointed end down, holding it the way you would hold a pen, though the angle is more upright because wax requires a different pressure than ink on papyrus. You inscribe the date at the top of the page, the third day before the nonnes, the consulship of two men whose names you write without hurry, each letter a small deliberate mark in the soft wax. The stylus leaves a shallow trench with raised edges, the letters standing out as dark lines against the lighter surface because the shadow catches in the groove. You form the words in the standard abbreviations used by clerks throughout the province, a shorthand that anyone in the Treasury office would recognize, the numerals composed of straight lines and simple curves. The act of writing the date is a small anchoring ritual, a way of placing this day in the long sequence of days that have come before and will follow after, all of them marked by the same small motions of hand and tool. The first ray of direct sun has now moved from the far wall to touch the corner of your ledger, warming the wood of the frame and making the wax slightly softer along the edge. You shift the book a little to keep the sun from melting the writing you have just made, and the light falls instead on the back of your hand, illuminating the fine hairs and the faint lines of old scars that you no longer think about. The sparrows in the eaves have quieted now, replaced by the cooing of a dove from somewhere closer, perhaps the courtyard garden that you can glimpse through the window if you lean slightly to the left. The dove's call is a soft three-note pattern that repeats every few seconds, a sound so regular and gentle that it becomes part of the silence rather than breaking it. You look around the room with the slow attention that comes from familiarity, noting the small things that have changed overnight. A new crack in the plaster above the door, the way the bronze bowl has dried in a pattern of concentric rings, the slight shift in the position of the strongbox where it must have been bumped when you closed up the evening before. None of these things require any action. They are simply details in the quiet landscape of your working life, each one as unremarkable as the next. You roll your shoulders slightly to ease the small stiffness from the walk, and you feel the wool of your cloak against your neck, warm now that you are indoors. You unfasten the clasp, a simple bronze brooch, and let the cloak fall open so that you can move your arms more freely when the work begins. The room is fully lit now, the sun having climbed above the roofs of the neighboring buildings, and the light that comes through the window is a clean, pale gold that makes the dust motes visible as they drift in lazy spirals through the air. You watch them for a time, the tiny particles rising and falling on currents too subtle to feel, some of them catching the light and glowing briefly like minute stars before they drift into shadow. The office feels settled and ready, the tools arranged, the ledger open, the lamp burning steadily with its small perpetual motion. You place the stylus in its groove, leave the ledger open to the fresh page, and rest your hands lightly on the edge of the table, palms down, feeling the smooth, cool wood under your fingers. The day stretches ahead of you without urgency, a long, quiet expanse of hours that will be filled with the counting of coins, the testing of weights, the scratching of the stylus, the wrapping of linen, the sealing of wax. You know each step of the process so thoroughly that your hands could perform it while your mind rested somewhere else entirely, perhaps drifting over the image of the courtyard garden or the sound of the fountain that you pass on your walk home. And yet there is a gentle satisfaction in being present for each small action, in giving it your full unhurried attention, the way a person might watch the slow movement of clouds across a summer sky. You are ready for the coins, and in a moment you will reach down and lift the strong box from beneath the table. But for now you remain seated, letting the last few seconds of preparation stretch out into the peaceful stillness of the morning office, where the light grows brighter by degrees, and the world outside continues its quiet turning. You let the stillness of the morning settle for just a few more breaths before you shift your weight on the stool and reach beneath the heavy wooden table. Your fingers find the familiar iron handles of the strong box, a chest banded with dark metal straps that cross its surface in a pattern of rectangles, each intersection secured by a nail with a square head worn smooth. The box is not large, about the length of your forearm and half as wide, but it is heavy with the weight of all the coins collected from yesterday's market stalls, and you must brace your feet against the flagstones to slide it out from under the table's shadow. The legs of the chest scrape softly on the stone, a low gritty sound that does not echo, and then the box sits before you in the morning light, its iron bands catching the lamp flame and the sun in two different kinds of gleam. You take the first key from the leather cord around your neck, a small brass key with a hollow barrel, and you fit it into the lower lock, turning it with a careful pressure until the pin lifts from its housing with a tiny muffled click. The second key hangs from a hook on the wall next to the cupboard, a longer iron key with a simple cross-shaped bit, and you rise to fetch it, feeling the change in your legs as they straighten after sitting. The wall hook is a bent nail driven into the plaster, and the key slides off it with a faint jingle. Back at the strongbox, you insert this second key into the upper lock, turning it in the opposite direction, and the bolt slides across inside the mechanism with a low grinding sound that speaks of iron moving against iron. The two locks are independent, and the chest will open only when both are released, a design that gives the treasury carriers confidence when the sealed bags travel along the roads. When the second lock yields, you lift the lid on its brass hinges, and it rises smoothly, the weight supported by the thick iron arms that keep it from falling back. Inside the strongbox, the leather sacks wait in orderly rows, each one sealed with a lead tag stamped by the overseer of the market stalls. The lead tags are small rectangles, pierced with a hole through which a leather cord passes, and the stamp on each shows a simple device, a wheat sheaf or a cornucopia, or the letters of the market district pressed into the soft metal. You let your eyes travel over the sacks, counting them without urgency. There are 6 in all, 3 of silver and 3 of bronze, and you recognize the shapes of the coins inside by the way the leather bulges and sags, the silver sacks smaller and denser, the bronze sacks larger and lumpier. The smell that rises from the open chest is a mix of old leather, a hint of tallow from the wax seals, and the ever-present metallic scent of the coins themselves, a smell that is dry and slightly sharp. You lift a first sack, one of the silver ones, and its weight shifts as the coins inside settle, with a muffled whisper of metal on metal, a sound like very distant rain on a tile roof. The sack is made of goatskin, tanned to a soft brown, and the fur side has been turned inward so that the coins rest against a smooth suede that will not scratch the surfaces. The cord that binds the neck is pulled tight, and you spend a long moment loosening it with patient fingers, unpicking the knot rather than cutting the leather thong so that the sack can be used again for the next collection. The knot is a simple one, a double loop and hitch, but the leather has stiffened overnight and you must work it back and forth gently until the loops loosen enough to slip free. The cord falls away and the neck of the sack opens like the mouth of a small animal awakening. You tip the contents onto the counting table in a careful stream, tilting the sack slowly so that the coins slide out without bouncing and they spill into a disorderly mound of silver and bronze mixed together, some bright as mirrors where they have been recently handled by merchants and shoppers, others dark with the accumulated touch of hundreds of hands over many years. The sound they make as they land is a bright, jingling clatter that lasts only a few seconds and then fades, leaving the coins piled in a small metal hillock that catches the light in 100 tiny points. You push the empty sack aside, folding it once and setting it on the corner of the table, and you look at the mound with the calm, assessing gaze of long practice. The coins in this sack came from the market stalls of the spice sellers and the cloth merchants, and they are mostly silver denarii with a scattering of the larger bronze sestertii that some customers paid as change. You can see the difference in color even from a small distance. The silver is pale and cool, the bronze warmer, darker, with patches of green where the copper has aged. You begin the first sorting, a simple separation by metal that your hands could do in near darkness after so many years. You let your fingertips learn the texture of each piece as you pick it up, the silver thin and slightly curved, the bronze heavier with a more pronounced rim, and you place them into 2 broad piles, silver to the left, bronze to the right. The work is unhurried, each coin lifted singly, inspected for a fraction of a second, and set down with a soft click. You do not count yet. You simply sort, creating order from the jumble, and as you work the 2 piles grow in size and shape, the silver forming a tall, narrow cone, the bronze a wider, flatter spread. Your fingers move in a gentle rhythm, and your mind can wander a little, noticing the way the sun has now reached the edge of the table and illuminates the silver coins so that they glow like small pale moons, while the bronze remains in relative shadow. When the first rough sort is complete, you push the bronze pile to the far side of the table and draw the silver closer, setting it directly before you on the counting area. The silver denarii are the standard coin of the empire, minted in the capital and shipped out to the provinces in sealed barrels, and each one bears the profile of the emperor on one face with a short inscription around the rim. The newer coins are sharp in their details, the laurel wreath clearly defined, the letters crisp and deep, while the older ones have been worn by years of trade until the emperor's nose is a slight bump and the inscription is faded to a ghost of faint scratches. You pick up a new coin and turn it over, seeing the familiar seated figure on the reverse, and then you pick up an old one and see the same figure reduced to a shadow. The contrast does not disturb you. It is simply the way of coins, moving from hand to hand, losing a little of themselves with each transaction. You begin to group the denarii into stacks of 10, a number chosen because 10 is easy to count and easy to multiply, and because a stack of 10 denarii is exactly as tall as your thumb is wide, a small bodily measure that has become second nature. You start at the left edge of the counting table and place the first stack, counting under your breath as you go. 1, 2, 3, and so on, until the 10th coin sits on top, its edge aligned with the ones below. A stack of 10 denarii has a particular appearance, a small silver column that is slightly irregular because no two coins are exactly identical, and the light reflects off the edges in a series of thin, bright lines. When a stack wobbles, you press it gently flat with a fingertip, nudging the coins until they sit solid, and then you move on to the next. The stacks form a row across the table, and the row grows longer as you work, the silver coins disappearing from the loose pile and reappearing as orderly towers. You pause to record a tally in the wax ledger, picking up the stylus and pressing the point into the soft surface to make a short vertical mark for each completed stack of 10. The marks are small, no taller than a grain of barley, and you arrange them in groups of 5, 4 vertical lines and a diagonal cross line, the standard pattern that makes counting the tally easy later. The stylus makes its familiar scratching whisper, and the wax yields with a slight resistance that you feel through the bronze shaft all the way to your knuckles. After each group of 5 stacks, you pause to stretch your fingers, flexing them open and closed once, and you notice the faint metallic scent that has begun to cling to your skin, the same smell that the strongbox holds, a smell of silver and copper and the traces of countless hands. You do not mind the smell. It is the smell of your work, as familiar as the scent of bread baking in the morning from the bakery 2 streets away. When the silver coins have all been stacked and the tally marks are complete, you push the stacks slightly apart so that you can count them a second time without disturbing them, touching each stack in turn with the tip of your stylus as you count aloud in a low murmur, 10, 20, 30, and onward. The number you arrive at matches the first count, and you make a small satisfied mark at the bottom of the tally, a simple cross that means verified. Then you sweep the stacks into a single larger pile, the coins sliding together with a soft musical clatter, and you scoop them into a clean cloth pouch that will hold them until the final weighing and wrapping later in the day. The pouch you set on the corner of the table with its neck open, and you turn your attention to the bronze. The bronze coinage is a more varied family than the silver, and you spend a quiet moment studying the heap of sestertii and asses that wait on the far side of the table. The sestertius is a large coin nearly the width of your palm, made of a golden brown brass that sometimes takes on a green patina where it has lain in damp places. The as is smaller, a copper coin that tends to darken to a deep brown, and the dupondius, when it appears, is a middle size with a reddish hue. You pull the bronze heap toward you and begin a second sort, this time separating the sestertii from the smaller denominations, creating 2 piles where there was 1. The bronze coins are louder than the silver. They clink together with a solid percussive sound when you gather them into a scoop of both hands and let them fall gently back onto the wood. a sound that is satisfying in its weight. You work through the piles steadily, picking out the large coins first, then the small, turning each one over to check for the denomination mark, the letters SC on the sestertius, the single I on the as. The counting of bronze follows a different pattern because the values are different. 4 asses to the sestertials, and you keep a mental separation, building one set of stacks for the larger denomination and another for the small. You count the sestertii in stacks of 5 this time, because 5 sestertii equal 20 asses, a convenient number for the ledger entries. The stacks are shorter and wider than the silver stacks, and the coins have a tendency to slide because they are flatter and less curved, so you build them more carefully, holding the stack steady with one finger on top while you add the next. The asses you count in stacks of 10, same as the denarii, and you arrange them in a separate row so that the 2 denominations do not mix. The lamplight catches the bronze surfaces and brings out the green patina on the older coins, a color that is like the moss on a shaded stone. And you notice how the patina can make a coin look almost painted, with patterns of light and dark that shift as you turn it. As you work, the sounds of the town outside have grown slightly louder, the morning now fully underway. You hear the distant voice of a vendor calling out the price of figs in a sing-song chant, the words indistinct but the rhythm familiar, a rise and fall that repeats every few seconds. A donkey brays somewhere near the market gate, a long harsh sound that tails off into a series of short grunts, and then the normal low hum of conversation and footsteps resumes. These sounds drift through the window and across the room, but they do not interrupt your concentration. They are simply the backdrop, a gentle tide of noise that rises and falls without demanding attention. You are aware of them, the way you are aware of your own breathing, a steady presence that requires no response. When the bronze counting is finished, you record the totals in the waxed ledger next to the silver tally, using the same small marks, the same arrangement in groups of 5. The stylus moves across the wax with a smooth, low sound, and you watch the letters form, the numeral for sestertii, the numeral for asses, each one a small precise mark that will later be copied into the permanent register. You check the totals again by counting the coins a different way, this time grouping the sesterii by value in denarii, since 4 sesterii equal 1 silver denarius, and you add the converted value to the silver total to see if the sum makes sense against what the market overseer's tag reported. The numbers are close, within a few small coins of the expected amount, and the small discrepancy you attribute to a worn coin that may have been counted as full weight when it is slightly light, a normal variation that you note with a quick scratch in the margin of the tablet. The patch of sunlight on the far wall has changed shape again, moving downward by a finger's width, and the room has warmed enough that you remove your cloak entirely, folding it once and laying it over the back of the stool. The wool of your tunic is a soft, undyed beige, the color of raw flax, and the sleeves are loose around your arms, allowing your wrists to move freely. You pour a little water from the clay jug into the bronze bowl and dip your fingers, washing off the fine metallic dust that has accumulated on your skin, and you dry your hands on the cloth that you used earlier to wipe the table. The water in the bowl is now faintly grey, and you pour it out the back window onto the small garden below, the drops scattering on the leaves of the rosemary bush that grows against the wall, releasing a brief sharp scent of the herb into the air. You return to the table and look at the remaining sacks that still wait inside the strong box. The first sack is empty and folded, the coin sorted and counted, the tally recorded. The morning has moved forward without hurry, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a task begun well, the sense that the day is unfolding exactly as it should. You lift the second sack from the strongbox, a bronze sack this time, heavier and more awkward, and you begin to loosen its cord, your fingers finding the same motions, the same small resistances, the same gentle untying of the knot. The coins inside shift as the sack opens, and you tip them onto the table, the mound of bronze pieces spilling out with a heavier, duller sound than the silver. The sorting begins again. The same separation by size and type, the same careful inspection of each coin, the same slow accumulation of order from randomness. The lamp burns steadily, its flame a small, unwavering spear, and the dove continues its soft cooing from the courtyard, a three-note pattern that becomes a kind of clock, marking the passage of the morning in gentle repeating intervals. With the broad sorting of the morning complete, and the initial stacks of silver counted into their neat rows of 10, you draw the tray of denarii closer across the worn wood of the table, positioning it so that the lamplight falls directly on the coins without casting shadows from your hands. The silver pieces lie in a loose shimmering scatter, their edges overlapping like fish scales, each one waiting to be examined in the particular unhurried way that the afternoon's work demands. You take a moment to settle on the stool, shifting your weight until the seat feels balanced, and you let your shoulders drop away from your ears, a small release of tension that you had not noticed building during the earlier counting. The office around you is warm now, the sun having moved past its zenith so that the direct beam no longer falls through the window, leaving instead a diffuse golden light that fills the room evenly, softening the edges of the furniture and making the plaster walls glow with a muted amber hue. You pick up the first denarius, choosing it not because it is remarkable, but simply because it rests at the front of the tray, its surface catching the flame in a bright point that shifts as you turn it between your thumb and forefinger. The coin is cool at first, the silver conducting the slight chill of the room into your skin, but it warms quickly, and you feel the faint ridge of the rim pressing against the pad of your thumb. You hold the denarius up to the lamplight, angling it so that the profile of the emperor emerges from the flat disc, the nose and chin, and the sweep of the laurel wreath appearing as a raised relief that catches the light along its highest points, while the recessed areas fall into fine shadow. This particular coin is a recent issue, struck perhaps 2 years ago at the mint in the capital, and the details are sharp, the letters of the inscription forming a clear circle around the head, each serif distinct and unbroken. You read the abbreviated titles without needing to sound them out, the familiar sequence of marks that proclaim the emperor's powers and offices, and you turn the coin over to study the reverse where a seated figure of justice holds scales and a cornucopia. The scales on the reverse remind you with a faint inward amusement of the balance that waits on your own table, a small parallel between the symbolic and the practical. You set this first coin down at the far left edge of the table and begin a new row, a row that will contain only the coins of this particular portrait type, the laureate head of the current emperor facing right. Your fingers return to the tray and select another denarius, and this one is older, perhaps struck during the reign of the previous emperor 20 years ago. The silver has darkened to a deeper grey, and the portrait is worn, the high points of the wreath flattened until they are barely raised above the background, the nose reduced to a gentle slope, the eye a shallow depression rather than a clearly defined orb. You trace the worn surface with the tip of your finger, feeling the smoothness where once there was crisp detail. And you consider how many hands have held this coin, how many purchases it has witnessed, how many hours it has spent jingling in purses and being counted on tabletops in distant provinces. The inscription on the older coin is legible only in parts. A few letters near the edge preserved while the central sections have been rubbed away to a blank smooth curve, and you hold it closer to the lamp, squinting slightly, to identify the emperor by the shape of the profile rather than by the text. The nose is longer, the chin more pointed, the neck thinner than the current emperor's portrait, and with these clues you place the coin in a second row, a row for the older issues that still circulate alongside the new. The separation by portrait type is a task that occupies you for a long, quiet stretch of the afternoon, and as you work, you find yourself noting the small variations that make each coin distinct despite the standardized dies. Some denarii have been struck slightly off-center, so that the emperor's head crowds the edge, while a blank crescent of unstruck silver occupies the opposite side. Others show faint cracks in the metal, hairline fissures that radiate from the center like the cracks in dried mud, the result of a die that was used past its proper life at the mint. There are coins that have been clipped around the edge, tiny slivers of silver removed by someone who hoped to accumulate a profit from the shavings, and you turn these pieces slowly, feeling the sharp, irregular edge against your fingertip where the rim should be smooth. Each clipped coin you set aside on a separate small cloth, not with any strong feeling about the dishonesty of the act, but simply because the regulations require a separate accounting for coins that are underweight or damaged. The lamp burns steadily as you work, its flame a constant small presence at the edge of your vision, and after a time you notice that the oil reservoir is running low, the level of the golden liquid barely covering the base of the wick. You pause in your inspection to refill the lamp from the small clay flask that you keep in the cupboard, tilting the flask slowly so that the oil runs in a thin thread into the reservoir, the surface rising gradually until it reaches the fill mark. The smell of fresh oil is greener and sharper than the smell of the oil that has been burning, and it mingles briefly with the other scents in the room before settling into the background. You trim the wick with the small bronze shears, cutting away the charred end that glows briefly orange before darkening, and then you touch the flame again and adjust the height until the light is steady and smokeless. The interruption is a brief one, and you return to the tray of denarii with the same calm attention, your eyes refocusing on the silver discs that wait. Now you take up the coins that you have set aside, because their color raised a question in your mind during the initial sort. Coins that appear too pale or too coppery at the edge, hinting at a core of base metal beneath a thin plating of silver. You hold the first of these suspect pieces under the lamp and turn it very slowly, watching the rim where the edge meets the flat surface. On an honest coin, the silver is the same color all the way through, but on a plated piece there is sometimes a faint line, a discontinuity where the silver layer ends and the darker metal beneath begins to show. This line is not always visible. Sometimes it is hidden by wear or by a clever forger who wrapped a plating over the edge, and in those cases you must rely on other tests. You place the coin on the pan of the balance, adding the smallest bronze weight to the opposite pan, the one marked for a single scripulum, and you watch the needle with patient eyes. The needle swings past the equilibrium mark and settles on the side of the weight, indicating that the coin is light, too light for its size, and you make a small note in the wax tablet, a single mark that denotes a plated suspect. The next coin you test in a different way, a way that does not rely on the scale but on the ear. You take the bronze testing needle from its slot in the tool holder, a thin rod of bronze about the length of your hand, with a blunt tip and a small wooden handle wrapped in twine. You hold the suspect denarius between your thumb and forefinger, balancing it on the tip of your finger so that it hangs free, and you tap it very gently with the needle. A quick light strike that produces a ringing tone. A true silver coin sings with a clear high note that fades slowly into the air, a sound that is almost musical, like the distant chime of a small bell. A plated coin, in contrast, gives a dull, short thud, a sound with no sustain, the vibration absorbed by the base metal core and the separation between the layers. You listen carefully to each tone, your head tilted slightly, and you can hear the difference as clearly as you can hear the difference between a full jar and an empty one when you tap it with a knuckle. The honest coins go back into their rows, the dull ones join the clipped and the light on the separate cloth. The testing and sorting continue through the long middle of the afternoon, and you fall into a rhythm that is less a matter of speed than of consistency, each action following the last with the same quiet deliberation. You pick up a coin, you turn it to the light, you check the portrait and the edge, you weigh it. If it feels light in the hand, you tap it if the color seems false, and then you place it in its proper row or on the cloth of irregularities. The sequence repeats dozens of times, and with each repetition the rows on the table grow longer, the portrait types separating into distinct columns that stretch across the wood. One row holds the current emperor with his short curled beard and strong nose, another the previous emperor with his thinner face and longer neck, and a third small row holds the very old coins that date back 3 or 4 reigns, their portraits reduced to barely recognizable silhouettes, their inscriptions worn completely away. These ancient pieces are still legal tender, still worth a full denarius despite their age, and you handle them with the same careful touch you give to the bright new coins, placing them gently in their row. While you work, the sounds of the town outside shift from the busy noise of midday to the slower, more intermittent sounds of the afternoon lull. The vendors in the market have grown quieter, their calls less frequent, and the constant murmur of shoppers has thinned as the heat of the day reaches its peak. You hear the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer from the ironworkers' quarter, a steady metallic beat that goes on for a few minutes and then stops, replaced by the bleating of goats being driven through the street toward the city gate. The goat bells make a random, tuneless jangling that fades as the herd moves on, and then the quiet returns, a quiet that is deeper than before, filled only by the soft scratch of your stylus when you pause to record a tally and the occasional flutter of the lamp flame in a draught. The dove in the courtyard has fallen silent, perhaps dozing in the shade of the fig tree, and even the sparrows have ceased their chatter, leaving the air still and heavy with the warmth of the afternoon. You finish the visual inspection of the silver, and turn your attention to the balance for a more systematic weighing, not just of the suspect coins but of a random sample from each portrait row, a practice required by the office protocols to ensure that the overall collection meets the Treasury's weight standards. You select 5 denarii from the current emperor's row, taking the 1st, the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, and the 20th, so that your sample is spread across the whole group. You place the first coin on the pan and watch it dip. Then you add the bronze weights to the opposite pan one by one, starting with the heaviest and working down to the lightest, until the needle floats level. The coin weighs exactly the standard amount, and you return it to its row with a small nod that no one sees. The second coin is light by a fraction of a scrupulum, a tiny difference that you record in the wax with a minuscule mark, and then the third, fourth, and fifth are all within the acceptable tolerance. Their weight variations so small that only the sensitive balance could detect them. The older coins you test in the same way, and you find that they are lighter on average, their years of circulation having worn away a small amount of silver from the surfaces, a loss that is gradual and inevitable, and accounted for in the Treasury's tables of acceptable wear. As the afternoon light begins to soften toward evening, the angle of the sun shifting so that the shadows lengthen across the floor, you take up the stylus and open the wax ledger to the page where the silver tallies wait. You copy the counts from your earlier tally marks into a more formal record, writing out the number of denarii of each portrait type, the number of clicked coins, the number of plated suspects, and the average weight of the sample you tested. The words you write are the standard phrases used in every provincial office, the same phrases that have been written for generations, and you form them with the same careful strokes you have used all day. The wax is softer now, warmed by the long afternoon, and the stylus moves through it with even less resistance than in the morning, the letters appearing as clean dark lines that stand out clearly against the pale surface. You pause once to rub the flat end of the stylus over a mistake, smoothing the wax and rewriting the number, and then you continue, your hand moving steadily across the page. When the record is complete, you set the stylus down and look at the rows of silver coins that cover the table, each row neatly aligned, each coin facing the same direction so that the lamplight gleams off the surfaces in a single continuous line. The cloth of irregular coins holds a small pile of clipped edges and plated suspects, a pile that is tiny compared to the orderly rows, and you tie the cloth into a bundle with a short length of twine, setting it next to the strongbox, where it will wait for the final report. The silver denarii are now fully inspected, tested, weighed, and recorded, and there is a quiet sense of completion in the way the table looks, the chaos of the morning's jumbled pile replaced by this calm arrangement of sorted and examined pieces. You let your gaze rest on the rows for a long moment, feeling the slow tiredness in your eyes from the close work, and then you close your eyes briefly, letting the darkness behind your lids soothe the small strain. When you open them again, the room seems softer, the light gentler, and the coins on the table seem less like objects of metal and more like a kind of quiet record, a map of the day's careful attention laid out in silver lines. With the silver denarii now counted, weighed, and aligned in their portrait rows, you turn your attention to the larger mass of bronze that covers the right side of the table, a sprawling territory of Cesterian asses whose colors range from the deep brown of old wood to the pale green of weathered copper roofs. The bronze coins are less uniform than the silver. They vary in thickness, diameter, and the condition of their surfaces, and they carry the smells of the market stalls where they spent their morning, faint traces of olive oil and fish brine, and the dusty sweetness of ground cumin. You push back the stool a few inches to give yourself more room, and you sit for a moment simply looking at the pile, letting your eyes travel over the random arrangement of round shapes, the overlapping rims, the occasional flash of a polished spot where a coin has been recently handled. The lamp flame bends slightly in a current of air you cannot feel, and the shadow of the bronze mound shifts on the tabletop a slow dart wave that moves and then stills. You begin the work of bronze sorting by setting out 2 empty trays, shallow wooden boxes that you take from the cupboard, each divided into compartments by thin slats of beechwood. The left tray you designate for sesterci, the large brass coins worth 4 arses, and the right tray for the smaller denominations, the arses and the occasional dupondius. You reach into the bronze pile with both hands, scooping up a loose double handful, the coins cool and heavy against your palms, their edges pressing into your skin with a dull, solid pressure. You let the coins fall gently into the left tray, and then you begin to pick through them one at a time, your eyes scanning each piece for the telltale signs of its value. The large SC on the reverse of the sesterius, the single eye on the as, the radiate crown of the dupondius. The sesteri are unmistakable once you know their weight, broader than your thumb joint, with a satisfying heft that makes them feel substantial. The asses are lighter, thinner, often darker in color, and the dupondii, when they appear, have a reddish tint and a slightly smaller diameter. The process of separating the bronze into its denominations is a gentle, repetitive motion, your right hand lifting a coin, your eyes checking the mark, your hand depositing the coin in its proper compartment. After a few minutes, the compartments begin to fill, the sesterity piling up in gleaming brass mounds, while the asses form darker, more irregular heaps. You notice the patinas more closely now. Some sesterti have a uniform golden brown color that speaks of a dry storage, while others are mottled with patches of deep green and black where moisture has worked on the copper for years. The green patina is smooth and hard, not powdery, a permanent alteration of the metal that feels almost like enamel under your fingertip. You find a sesterius that is nearly entirely green, except for a single bright spot where the brass shines through. A spot that catches the light and glows like a tiny sun, and you hold it for a moment longer than necessary, turning it so that the bright spot travels around the circumference. Then you place it with the others. The sorting continues until the loose pile on the table has been transferred entirely to the trays, the compartments now filled to their edges with sorted bronze. You slide the tray of asses and dupondii to one side and draw the tray of sesteri directly before you on the counting table. The next stage is the formal count, and for this you will use the counting board that hangs on a peg beside the cupboard. You rise to fetch it, your knees making a small popping sound as you stand after so long sitting, and you cross the room to where the board waits. The counting board is a flat plank of seasoned oak, about the width of your shoulders and the length of your arm, its surface marked by 10 shallow grooves that run parallel from one end to the other. The grooves have been worn smooth by countless coins sliding into them over the years, and the wood between them is polished to a dark sheen by the friction of fingertips. You carry the board to the table and set it down with care, aligning it so that the grooves run from left to right, the open ends facing you. Now you begin to fill the grooves with sesterci, taking the coins from the tray and laying them edge to edge along each channel. Each groove holds exactly 20 sesteri when packed snugly, the coins fitting together like a row of tiny shields, their rims touching, their faces all oriented the same way, so that the emperor on the obverse looks out from every position. You start with the top groove, placing the first coin at the far end and working backward toward yourself, your fingers nudging each coin against its neighbor until there is no gap. The coins make a soft clicking sound as they meet, a sound that is higher and more resonant than the sound of silver, a small bell-like chime that fades quickly. When the first groove is full, you run a finger along the row, feeling the even alignment of the rims, and then you move on to the second groove, filling it in the same manner, and then the third. The work absorbs you in its steady rhythm, each groove taking about as long as it takes for the sun to move a finger's width across the floor, and you lose track of the minutes, aware only of the coins on the board and the quiet satisfaction of seeing the grooves fill with orderly brass columns. After you have filled 5 grooves with sestertii, a total of 100 coins, you pause to record the tally. You pull the wax tablet closer and inscribe a numeral, using the stylus, to cut the simple shape that stands for 100, a long vertical line with a crossbar. The wax is warm now, almost soft, and the stylus leaves a deep clear mark that you will later transfer to the permanent register. You return to the board and fill the remaining 5 grooves, bringing the total to 200 sesteri, and you make a second mark in the wax, another 100 symbol, and then a small note that the count is preliminary and awaits final verification. The grooves now hold 200 sestertii, and the tray of bronze is still half full, so you must empty the board and begin again. You sweep the coins from the grooves into a cloth bag, tilting the board carefully so that the coins slide down the channels and into the open mouth of the sack, their edges ringing against each other as they fall. The sound of 200 sesteri dropping into a cloth sack is a prolonged musical platter, a cascade of small bright notes that seems to go on for several seconds before it subsides. You tie the sack loosely, just enough to keep the coins contained, and set it on the floor beside the strongbox. Then you return to the tray and begin filling the grooves again. The same motion, the same soft clicking, the same quiet accumulation of order. As you work through the second batch of sestertii, the afternoon outside the window moves toward its later hours, and the light that enters the room has taken on a warmer tone, more amber than gold. You hear the distant sound of children playing in the street, their voices high and thin, a series of calls and responses that you cannot make out, but that follow the pattern of a game, a chase perhaps, the slap of sandals on stone, and then a burst of laughter. The sound fades as the children move on, and the quiet returns filled only by the rustle of your tunic as you reach for another coin, the click of bronze on bronze, the scratch of the stylus in the wax. When the sestertii have all been counted and bagged, you turn to the tray of asses and dupondii. These smaller coins require a different approach because they are worth less individually, and the count will be larger, so you decide to use the abacus for the tally rather than the grooves of the counting board, though you will still arrange the coins in stacks for easy verification. You take the abacus from its hook on the wall, a rectangular wooden frame with 10 bronze rods running horizontally, each rod strung with 9 small pebbles of polished stone, some white, some grey. The pebbles slide along the rods with a soft clicking sound, and you shake the frame gently to settle all the pebbles against the left side, clearing the register to 0. The abacus is a tool you have used for so many years that your fingers move across it without conscious thought, sliding pebbles to the right to add numbers, back to the left to subtract, the motions as automatic as breathing. You begin to count the asses, stacking them in piles of 10 on the table, just as you did with the silver. Each stack of 10 asses represents 10 asses, and since 4 asses make a sesteris, you must keep a running conversion in your head, though the abacus will help. For every 4 stacks of 10 asses, or 40 asses, you have 10 sestetii, and you slide 1 pebble on the sestetius rod of the abacus to mark it. The pebbles click softly as they move, a dry sound like a small stone dropped onto a path, and the register grows slowly as the stacks of asses multiply across the table. You count the stacks aloud in a low murmur, your voice barely above a whisper, the numbers falling into the quiet room and disappearing. 10, 20, 30, 40, and a pebble slides. 10, 20, 30, 40, and another pebble slides. The rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic, and your eyelids grow slightly heavy as you work, not from boredom, but from a kind of deep calm, the calm that comes from a task that requires just enough attention to occupy the mind without straining it. The dupondii, being worth 2 asses each, are counted separately. You gather them from the tray where they have been mixed with the asses, picking them out by their radiate crowns, the spiked halos that distinguish them from the laureate heads on the asses. There are not many dupondii, only a few handfuls, and you count them quickly, grouping them in stacks of 5, because 5 dupondii equal 10 asses, a convenient number that lets you add them directly to the abacus. You slide a few more pebbles, the abacus now showing a total that combines the sestertii from the board and the asses and dupondii from the stacks. The total is a number that you will not remember once the day is done, a sum that matters only for the ledger and the courier's manifest, but for this moment it sits on the abacus as a neat arrangement of pebbles, a visual representation of all the counting you have done. You verify the count by running through it a second time, this time using the counting board for the asses as well, filling the grooves with the smaller coins and checking that the number of filled grooves matches the pebbles on the abacus. The verification takes time, and the room grows dimmer as you work, the sun now low enough that the shadow of the window grill stretches halfway across the floor. You light a second lamp, a smaller one that you keep for the evening hours, and the new flame joins the first, the 2 lights pooling on the table and pushing back the encroaching dusk. The double light makes the bronze coins look richer, the greens deeper, the browns warmer, and your hands move in and out of the illuminated circle as you place coins in the grooves and check the tally. When the verification is complete and the numbers match, you sweep the asses and dupondii into their own cloth bag, a larger bag than the one used for the sestertii, and you tie it with a hemp cord, leaving the ends long for the sealing that will come later. The bronze coins are now fully counted, their numbers recorded in the wax, their bags waiting on the floor beside the strongbox, and you sit back on the stool and let your hands rest on your thighs, the muscles of your forearms slightly tired from the repetitive motions. The office around you is quiet, the 2 lamps burning with a soft hiss, the smell of warm oil mingling with the metallic scent of bronze and the faint traces of dust. Outside, the street has fallen silent, the vendors long gone, the children indoors, the only sound the distant trickle of the fountain in the courtyard garden where the water runs day and night. You listen to that water for a while, letting its steady voice fill your ears, and you feel the day's work settling behind you like a weight that is not heavy, but simply present, a marker of hours well spent. The abacus still shows the final number, its pebbles waiting to be cleared, but you leave them there for now, a small monument to the afternoon's counting, and you close your eyes for just a moment to rest them before the next task begins. The 2 lamps now provide the only light in the room, their flames steady and upright in the still air, pooling a warm amber glow across the counting table where the bags of sorted coins wait in a row like small loaf-shaped sentinels. You rise from the stool, feeling the slight stiffness in your lower back that comes from sitting through the long afternoon, and you stretch your arms overhead with a slow, deliberate motion, your fingers spreading wide, your shoulders lifting toward your ears and then dropping. The stroke sends a small wave of ease down your spine, and you hold it for a few breaths before letting your arms fall back to your sides. The office around you is deeply quiet now, the kind of quiet that settles over a provincial town in the late afternoon when the market has closed and the streets have emptied, and even the dogs have found patches of shade in which to doze. You cross to the cupboard where you keep the supplies for wrapping and sealing, your sandals making a soft dry sound on the flagstones, and you open the double doors to reveal the neat arrangement of linens and twines and wax that you will need. From the top shelf you bring out a bundle of linen cloths, each cut to a square roughly the size of a spread hand, the edges hemmed with simple stitching to prevent fraying. The linen is a pale, unbleached beige, the color of wheat straw, and it carries the faint, clean scent of the flax plant from which it was woven, a smell that is dry and slightly grassy. You count out the cloths you will need, one for each bag of coins to be sealed, and you stack them on the corner of the table where they will be within easy reach. Next you take the ball of hempen twine from its hook on the cupboard wall, a dense sphere of twisted fibers about the size of a small apple. The twine itself, a light brown color, with darker flecks where the outer stalk of the hemp plant has been incorporated into the strands. The twine smells of the fields where it was grown, a scent that is earthy and faintly sweet, like dried grass after a rain. You pull a length of twine from the ball and cut it with the small iron shears that hang from your belt, the blades meeting with a crisp snip, and you coil the cut length into a loose loop that you set beside the linen cloths. You repeat this several times until you have a small pile of coiled twine links, enough for all the bags you will seal. The wax for the seals waits in a small iron pot that sits in a niche near the lamp, where it has been warming gently through the afternoon, the heat from the flame keeping it at the perfect consistency. You check the wax by dipping a slender wooden stick into the pot and lifting it, watching the amber liquid drip back in slow, heavy drops. It is ready, not too thick, not too thin, just fluid enough to pour smoothly and set quickly when impressed. The wax itself is a mixture of beeswax and pine resin with a small amount of red ochre added to give it a warm brownish color, and as it warms, it releases a resinous scent that reminds you of pine forests on a hot day, a sharp, clean smell that cuts through the oil and metal of the office. You set the wax pot on a small ceramic tile near the lamp, where it will remain warm but not boil, and you place your signet ring within reach, slipping it off your finger and setting it on the tile beside the pot. The larger scale, the steelyard, hangs from an iron bracket mounted on the wall beside the cupboard, and you lift it down with both hands, carrying it to the table, where you secure its hook over the edge, so that the arm projects outward at the correct height. The steelyard is a different instrument from the delicate pan balance you used for testing individual coins. It is larger, stronger, designed to weigh heavy sacks rather than single pieces. It consists of a graduated bronze arm marked with notches at regular intervals, a hook at one end for the load, and a bronze weight shaped like a pomegranate that slides along the arm, its position determining the measure. The weight is polished from years of handling, the surface a dark gold where fingers have gripped it, and it moves along the arm with a smooth sliding action that produces a low resonant hum, the metal of the weight vibrating against the metal of the arm for just an instant before settling. You begin the weighing with the silver, because the silver is the most valuable, and its weight must be recorded with the greatest precision. You take the cloth bag of sorted denarii from its place on the table and hang it from the hook of the steelyard, the bag swinging slightly as it finds its center of gravity. Then you slide the pomegranate weight along the arm, starting at the far end and working inward, watching the arm rise and fall as the balance point shifts. The arm moves slowly, a gentle tilting motion that requires patience to read correctly, and you wait each time you move the weight, letting the system settle before you assess the level. When the arm floats horizontal, the tip aligned with the scratch mark on the bracket, you note the notch where the weight rests and read the number that is engraved beside it. The number represents libre and uncia, the standard units of the Treasury weight system, and you speak it very softly to yourself as you turn to the ledger, your voice a low murmur that does not disturb the quiet. In the wax tablet you record the weight of the silver, writing the numeral with the same careful strokes you've used all day, the stylus moving in short arcs and straight lines. Then you lift the bag from the hook and set it back on the table, and you begin the wrapping proper. You lay a linen cloth flat on the table, smoothing it with your palm so that no wrinkles remain, and you pour the silver coins from their temporary cloth bag onto the center of the linen. The coins slide out in a bright stream, piling up in the middle of the square, and you arrange them into a compact cylindrical shape, using both hands to mold the pile, pressing the coins together so that they form a dense mass that will not shift during transport. The silver feels cool against your fingers, and the edges of the coins press into your palms with a faint serrated sensation. When the pile is shaped to your satisfaction, you bring the four corners of the linen together above it, gathering them into a tight bunch, and you twist the fabric so that it cinches around the coins, forming a neck that you grip firmly with one hand while reaching for the twine with the other. You wrap the hempen twine around the neck of the linen sack in a figure of 8, the cord crossing over itself to create a binding that tightens when pulled and holds fast without slipping. You loop the twine 3 times, 4 times, each pass adding security, and then you tie it off with a double knot that you pull snug with a quick firm tug. The knot sits against the twisted linen like a small brown spider, its legs tucked neatly under itself, and you trim the excess twine with the shears, leaving a short tail that you tuck under the binding. The wrap sack now has the shape of a small onion, the coins hidden inside the pale linen, the twine dark against the light fabric. You hold it in your palm for a moment, feeling the solid weight, the way the coins have become a single unified mass rather than a loose collection of individual pieces. Now comes the sealing, the final act that transforms the wrapped sack into an official treasury packet. You take the iron pot of warm wax and tilt it carefully over the knot, letting a few drops fall onto the twine and the gathered linen. The wax lands with a soft plop, spreading slightly before it begins to cool, its surface going from glossy to matte as it loses heat. You set the pot down and pick up your signet ring, pressing it into the warm wax with a steady, even pressure, holding it there for the space of 2 slow breaths while the wax conforms to the engraved design. When you lift the ring away, the impression remains, a clear, sharp image of a standing figure holding a cornucopia, the mark of the provincial treasury that every courier and official will recognize. The wax cools rapidly, turning from a translucent amber to an opaque brown, and within a few seconds it is hard enough that you can touch it with a fingertip without leaving a mark. You test the seal with a gentle prod and it holds firm. The wax now a permanent closure that will have to be broken to access the coins. You set the first sealed bag at the back of the table, where it will wait while you wrap the others, and you reach for the next linen cloth and the next coil of twine. The process repeats, each step flowing into the next with the same unhurried rhythm. Weigh, pour, shape, gather, twist, tie, drip, press. Weigh, pour, shape, gather, twist, tie, drip, press. Weigh, pour, shape, gather, twist. The sequence becomes a kind of quiet music in your mind, a pattern that occupies your hands while your thoughts drift gently, touching on nothing in particular, just floating in the calm space that the work creates. The second bag of silver is wrapped and sealed, and then the third, and you line them up along the back of the table, so that by the time the silver is finished, there is a neat row of pale linen bundles, each one sealed with the same small image, each one containing a known weight of denarii that you have counted and tested and verified. You turn now to the bronze, and because the bronze coins are larger and heavier, you use larger linen cloths, squares that are the size of a dinner plate rather than a spread hand. You take these from the lower shelf of the cupboard, unfolding them one at a time, and you spread the first one across the table. The sestertii bag is heavy, and you must use both hands to lift it from the floor where it has been waiting, the muscles of your arms tensing slightly as you swing it up onto the table. The coins inside shift with a deep muffled clatter, a sound that is lower and denser than the silver, a sound that speaks of greater mass and lesser value. You open the temporary bag and pour the sesteri onto the large linen cloth, the brass discs spreading out in a wide circle, some of them spinning briefly before settling. The patinas of the coins create a mottled pattern on the cloth, greens and browns, and occasional bright spots of bare brass, and the pile is large enough that you must use a scooping motion with both hands to gather the coins into a central mound. Shaping the bronze into a compact bundle is a slightly different process from the silver because the coins are less uniform. Some sestertii are thicker than others, some have irregular edges, and the pile does not want to hold a tight cylindrical shape. You work patiently, turning the pile, pressing the sides, adjusting the coins that try to slide out, until you have a rough dome that you can gather the linen around. The fabric strains slightly under the weight, and you twist the corners together with a firmer grip than before, feeling the muscles of your forearms engage. The twine for the bronze bags is a thicker cord, also made of hemp, but with a heavier twist, and you wrap it around the neck of the bundle in the same figure of 8 pattern, pulling it tight with deliberate strength. The knot you tie is larger, a double loop and a half hitch, and you test it by lifting the bundle by the knot alone, the weight of the coins pulling the twine taut. It holds, and you set the bundle down with a soft thud, the table leg absorbing the impact. The sealing of the bronze bags follows the same steps as the silver, the drip of warm wax, the press of the signet, the moment of waiting while the wax cools. The larger wax seals on the bronze bags are slightly wider than the ones on the silver, because the knot is larger and requires more wax to cover it completely, and you tilt the pot more generously, letting the amber liquid flow until it pools around the twine. The signet sinks into the deeper wax, and when you lift it away, the impression is bolder, the standing figure and the cornucopia standing out in high relief against the matte background. You blow very gently on the seal to speed its cooling, a soft breath that makes the surface of the wax dimple slightly before it hardens, and then you test it with the same light prod of your fingertip. The second bronze bag is wrapped, tied, and sealed, and then the third and finally the small bag of irregular coins that you set aside during the silver inspection, the clipped denarii and the plated suspects, gets its own tiny linen wrap. This bundle is the smallest of all, no larger than a quail, and you use a scrap of linen left over from trimming the larger cloths, folding it around the coins with careful precision so that the fabric layers are smooth and the twine is snug. The wax seal on this bundle is a single small dot, just enough to hold the twine and show the mark, and you press the signet with a light touch so that the impression is clear but not deep. You place the tiny bundle alongside the larger ones, and the row of sealed bags now stretches across the full width of the table, a collection of pale linen shapes that all bear the same treasury stamp, all ready for the courier who will arrive in the morning. You step back from the table and wipe your hands on a clean rag, rubbing away the traces of wax and the fine metallic dust that has accumulated on your palms. The room smells strongly of warm wax now, the piney scent of the resin blending with the oil lamps and the ever-present bronze, and the sealed bags give off a faint collective smell of clean linen and hemp. The lamps have burned down slightly, their flames shorter than they were an hour ago, and you pour a little more oil into each reservoir, tilting the clay flask with the same careful motion you have used all day. The wicks drink the oil, and the flames rise again, steady and bright, and you sit back on the stool for a moment to survey the work. The bags are sealed, the weights recorded, the tallies complete, and the table, which this morning held a chaotic jumble of coins from the market, now holds only orderly bundles and the quiet evidence of a day's careful labor. You let out a long, slow breath that you had not realized you were holding, and you feel the pleasant tiredness that comes from completing a task that required nothing more than patience and attention. A tiredness that is as soft and unremarkable as the fading light beyond the shutters. When the last wax seal has cooled, and the row of linen bundles stands complete along the back of the table, you become aware of a slow, hollow sensation in your stomach, a gentle reminder that the morning's work has carried you well past the usual hour for the midday meal. You note the position of the sun by the shadow of the door frame, a slant of deep amber that now stretches nearly to the far wall, and you see that the shadow has moved well beyond the scratch mark that indicates noon. The office around you is warm, the air thickened by the heat of the afternoon and the steady output of the two lamps, and you feel a pleasant heaviness in your limbs, the kind of tiredness that comes not from exertion but from sustained attention. You decide that this is the right moment to pause, to let the work rest while you restore yourself, and you begin the small sequence of actions that will close the morning and open the quiet hour of the midday break. First you secure the strong box, because the sealed bags must be locked away even during a short absence, a habit so ingrained that you perform it without conscious decision. You lift the iron lid and swing it down gently, the hinges making their low familiar murmur. The two keys turn in their locks, the upper bolt sliding across with that deep grinding sound, the lower pin clicking into its housing, and you test the lid with the press of your palm to ensure it holds fast. The strong box sits solidly under the table once more, its iron bands gleaming dully in the lamplight, and you slide it back into its recess where it will remain until the courier arrives. You wipe your hands on the rag one final time, then hang the rag over the edge of the basin to dry. From a niche in the wall beside the cupboard, a small rectangular alcove that stays cool even on warm days, you take out a linen bundle that contains your meal. The bundle is tied with a simple cord, and you carry it to the stone bench by the open window, where a gentle current of air moves through the shutters, fresh but not cold, carrying the faint green scent of the rosemary bush below. The bench is a simple slab of grey stone set into the wall, its surface worn smooth by years of use, and it is just long enough to sit comfortably with your back against the plaster. You settle onto it, feeling the coolness of the stone through the wool of your tunic, and you untie the cord of your meal bundle with the same patient fingers that have untied coin sacks all morning. Inside the bundle, the food waits in its simple arrangement: a round of flat bread about the width of a plate, a piece of hard cheese wrapped in a nettle leaf, a few olives glistening with oil in a tiny clay cup, and 2 dried figs that have stuck together slightly in the warmth. You spread the linen on your lap to catch crumbs and lay the food out across it. The bread first, then the cheese beside it, then the clay cup of olives, and finally the figs that you pull apart with a gentle tug, the dried fruit giving way with a soft tearing sound. The bread is pale brown, dusted with a fine layer of flour that leaves a faint white mark on your fingertips, and you tear a piece from the edge, the crust cracking slightly before the soft interior yields. The bread smells faintly of the wood-fired oven where it was baked early this morning, a smell that is nutty and warm, and you eat the first piece slowly, chewing with the deliberate pace of someone who has no reason to hurry. The cheese is made from goat's milk, firm and pale, and you cut a slice from the block with the small eating knife you keep in your belt pouch, a knife with a bone handle and a short curved blade that is too dull for anything but food. The cheese crumbles slightly at the edge where the knife passes, and the crumbs you press onto the bread. The combination of salty cheese and mild bread, filling your mouth with a familiar comfort. You eat, looking out through the open shutters at the courtyard garden that is just visible through a gap in the surrounding buildings, a small green space that belongs to the town council and is tended by an old gardener who you sometimes see in the early mornings. The garden is a tangle of rosemary and lavender, a small fig tree whose leaves are still the bright green of early summer, and a stone fountain in the center that sends a thin stream of water upward before it falls back into a circular basin. The water catches the afternoon light and scatters it in tiny flashes, and the sound of it is a steady musical trickle that has been the background to your midday meals for as long as you have worked in this office. A blackbird lands on the edge of the fountain basin, its feathers, a glossy dark brown that looks almost black in the shadow, its beak a bright orange that stands out against the grey stone. It dips its beak into the water, tilts its head back, and lets the water run down its throat in a series of quick swallows, the small movements visible even from your bench. You wash the bird without thinking much about it, simply letting the image register, the way the bird shakes its wings after drinking, sending a fine spray of droplets into the air that catch the sun for just an instant before disappearing. The bird hops along the rim of the basin, turns once as if checking its surroundings, and then flies off toward the fig tree where it disappears among the broad leaves. You return your attention to your meal, and take an olive from the clay cup, the olive a deep purplish black and slick with the oil in which it has been stored. You bite into it carefully, working your teeth around the pit, and the taste is sharp and briny, a burst of salt that makes your mouth water. You place the pit on the stone bench beside you, where it makes a tiny click, and you take another olive, eating it more slowly this time, letting the flavor linger on your tongue before you swallow. The oil from the olives has left a small dark stain on the linen bundle, a stain that will never wash out, and you notice it without concern, the same way you notice the small crack in the plaster above the window or the worn spot on the floor where your stool sits. These marks are the quiet signs of routine, the accumulated evidence of many similar meals eaten on many similar days. You break off another piece of bread and use it to press a crumble of cheese onto your tongue, chewing slowly while your gaze drifts across the courtyard garden. The rosemary bush moves very slightly in a breeze that you cannot feel, its narrow leaves shifting with a faint silvery shimmer, and the lavender beyond it stands still, its purple flowers closed tight in the afternoon heat. The fig tree casts a dense shadow on the ground beneath it, a shadow that is almost black compared to the sun-bleached stones around it. And you think about how the figs will be ripe in another month, how the gardener will bring a basket of them to the office, as he does every year, a small gift that you accept with quiet thanks. The thought passes through your mind gently, without urgency, just another small observation to accompany the meal. When the bread and cheese are finished, and only the dried figs remain, you take one of the figs and bite into it, the texture chewy and dense, the sweetness concentrated by the drying process into something almost like honey. The fig seeds crunch very slightly between your teeth, a sensation that is pleasant and familiar, and you eat the fig in 3 bites, saving the second one for last. The second fig you eat more slowly still, breaking it into small pieces with your fingers and placing each piece on your tongue separately, letting it soften before you chew. The figs leave a sticky residue on your fingers, and you wipe them on the corner of the linen bundle before folding it around the olive pits and the nettle leaf that had wrapped the cheese. You pour a cup of water from the clay jug that you brought from the table, the water cool from sitting in the shade, and you drink it in slow sips, feeling it move down your throat and settle coolly in your stomach. The cup is a simple beaker of unglazed clay, the rim worn smooth where your lips have touched it, and you hold it in both hands after drinking, enjoying the residual coolness against your palms. You pour a little more water into your cupped hand and splash your face, the coolness bringing a brief alertness that softens immediately into a calm, restful awareness. The water runs down your chin, and you catch it with the back of your hand, drying your face on the sleeve of your tunic, the wool scratchy but absorbent. You lean back against the plaster wall and feel the sun-warmed stone through the fabric of your tunic, a warmth that penetrates slowly, easing the small tightness in your shoulders. The sounds of the town are muted by the thick walls and by the distance, arriving as a low composite hum that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You hear the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer starting up again from the ironworker's quarter, a steady beat that continues for a dozen strokes and then pauses, then resumes. A horse's hoofs ring on the cobbles, somewhere near the market gate, the sound sharp and distinct, fading as the animal moves away. A woman calls to a child in a voice that you cannot make out, the words indistinct but the tone clear, a summons that is repeated once and then falls silent. These sounds blend into the background, a gentle tide of noise that rises and falls without demanding attention, and you let them wash over you without listening closely. You close your eyes for a few minutes, not sleeping, but simply resting in the grey quiet behind your eyelids. The darkness there is not complete. You can sense the light of the afternoon through the thin skin of your lids, a warm reddish glow that shifts slightly when the breeze moves the shutters. Your breathing slows without your noticing, becoming deeper and more regular, and the faint ache in your feet from standing on the stone floor begins to fade. You do not think about the coins or the ledgers or the courier who will come in the morning. You let all of that drift away, floating somewhere beyond the edges of your awareness, while you remain in this quiet space between waking and sleeping. The stone bench feels solid and secure beneath you, the wall firm against your back, and there is a deep comfort in being exactly where you are, with nothing expected of you and nothing to do. Time passes without measure. When you open your eyes again, the shadow on the opposite wall has moved another hand's breadth, and the light in the room has shifted slightly, the amber deepening toward a richer gold. You feel refreshed, the tiredness that had settled in your limbs now replaced by a calm readiness, and you sit forward on the bench, rolling your shoulders once to loosen them. The meal has done its quiet work, and the rest has cleared the small fog that had begun to gather at the edges of your concentration. You gather the linen bundle with the olive pits and the cheese leaf, folding it neatly and placing it back in the wall niche, where you will retrieve it at the end of the day to take home for washing. The clay cup you rinse with a splash of water, the droplets scattering on the stone sill, and you set it upside down to dry beside the jug. You rise from the bench, straighten your tunic where it is bunched at the waist, and cross the room to the table where the sealed bags wait and the abacus still shows the final count from the morning. The 2 lamps have burned steadily through your meal, their flames unchanged, and you pause to check the oil levels, lifting each lamp carefully and tilting it to see the golden liquid through the translucent clay. Both reservoirs are still more than half full, enough to last through the remaining hours of the afternoon. You adjust one wick that has begun to smoke slightly, pinching off the charred end with the bronze shears, and the flame immediately steadies and brightens. The smell of fresh olive oil rises briefly, mixes with the lingering scent of pine resin from the wax seals, and then settles into the general aroma of the office that you no longer consciously notice. You stand beside the table for a moment, your hands resting lightly on the wood, your eyes traveling over the orderly arrangement of tools and bundles. The strong box is locked, the sealed bags are ready. The ledger is open to the page where the tallies wait to be transformed into the formal written record. The afternoon stretches ahead of you with the same unhurried calm that has characterized the whole day, a long quiet expanse of hours that will be filled with the scratching of the stylus, the dipping of the reed pen, the slow careful work of transferring numbers from wax to papyrus. You are ready to begin again, the rest having restored your attention to its full gentle focus, and you pull the stool back to the table, settling onto its polished seat with the familiar sense of returning to a task that is already half known. The lamp flame bends very slightly as you sit, then straightens, and the afternoon waits. With the meal settled and the quiet hour of rest behind you, the office seems subtly changed, the light now streaming through the window at a lower angle so that it falls in long golden rectangles across the flagstones and climbs the far wall in a slow amber tide. You pull the stool closer to the table, feeling the familiar polished wood beneath you, and you draw the great wax ledger toward you across the tabletop, its wooden covers sliding with a soft, scraping sound. The ledger is heavy, a codex of 10-bound tablets held together by leather thongs that pass through holes drilled in the beechwood frames. And when you open it to the page where this morning's tally marks wait in their neat rows, The wax gives off a faint smell of honey and dust. The tally marks are small and precise. The vertical lines and diagonal crosshatches that you inscribed hours ago now looking back at you like a quiet record of the morning's attention. Each mark standing for a stack of coins, each group of 5 marks a completed count. You take a moment to review the tallies before you begin the formal record, tracing the marks with the blunt end of the stylus, your lips moving slightly as you count under your breath. The silver tally shows the denarii separated by portrait type, the new coins and the old coins, and the very ancient pieces that have been circulating since before you were born. And beside each category the number of stacks is recorded in the simple shorthand that any clerk in any provincial office would recognize. The bronze tally follows, the sesterii and the asses and the handful of dupondii, and at the bottom of the page your earlier self has written the totals in small cramped numerals that are nevertheless perfectly legible. The numbers match what you remember, and you nod slightly, a small private gesture of confirmation. Now you must transform these rough tally marks into the formal written record, a task that requires a different kind of attention than the counting and sorting of the morning. If the morning was about the hands, the afternoon will be about the eyes and the stylus, about the slow, precise work of forming letters that will be read by other clerks in other offices, letters that must be clear and correct because they will become part of the permanent archive of the provincial treasury. You take the bronze stylus from its groove in the wooden frame and examine its point in the lamplight, turning it so that the light catches the very tip where the metal has been worn to a smooth angled facet by years of pressing into wax. The point is still sharp, but you decide to freshen it anyway, a small preparatory ritual that helps you shift from the physical work of counting to the mental work of writing. You reach for the whetstone that sits in a small depression in the corner of the table, a rectangular piece of fine grey stone about the length of your thumb, its surface worn into a gentle curve by countless passes of the stylus. You pour a few drops of water from the clay jug onto the stone, watching the liquid bead up and then spread, darkening the grey to a deeper charcoal. Then you draw the point of the stylus across the stone in a slow, steady stroke, away from your body, the metal making a faint, high ringing sound that is almost musical. You turn the stylus and stroke the other side, and then again, until the point is clean and sharp and catches the light in a tiny bright star. You wipe the point on the rag, removing the fine grey slurry that the sharpening has produced, and you test it on a scrap of waste wax in the margin of the tablet, the point sinking in smoothly and leaving a clean dark line with raised edges. You are ready. The formal record begins with the date, and you inscribe it at the top of the clean page, using the same words you wrote this morning, but now in a larger, more careful hand, the letters formed with deliberation rather than the quick shorthand of the tally marks. You write the day, the month, the year of the current consulship, and you add the name of the provincial governor beneath it, a standard heading that appears on every official record. The stylus moves through the wax with a smooth, low resistance, the wax having softened slightly in the warmth of the afternoon, so that it yields to the bronze like thick cream under a spoon. The letters appear as dark trenches against the pale surface, and you pause after each word to check the spelling, though you know the spelling by heart, have written these same words thousands of times on thousands of days. Below the heading you write the first category, silver denarii. You underline the words with a single straight stroke, and then you begin to copy the tally numbers into formal numerals, writing the quantity of new portrait coins, the quantity of old portrait coins, and the quantity of the very ancient pieces. The numerals are the standard ones used throughout the treasury system, a combination of symbols that represent units and tens and hundreds, and you form them with the same careful strokes, the same small curves and straight lines. Beside each quantity you write the weight as measured on the steel yard, the libre and uncier recorded in the treasury standard units, and you double-check each number against the weight tallies you made during the wrapping and sealing. The numbers match, as they almost always do, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of accuracy, a satisfaction that is not pride, but simply a sense of things being as they should be. When the silver section is complete, you move on to the bronze, writing the heading and then the quantities of sesteritae, asses, and dupondii, each with its weight and its converted value in silver denarii. The conversion is a simple calculation: 4 sesteritae to the denarius, 16 asses to the denarius, 8 dupondii to the denarius, and you perform it in your head as you write, the numbers shifting and settling into their proper relationships. You pause once to check a total on the abacus, sliding the pebbles to confirm that the converted value of the bronze matches what you have written, and the pebbles click softly under your fingers. The sound a brief interruption in the otherwise continuous scratching of the stylus. The next section of the formal record is the report on the irregular coins, the clipped denarii, and the plated suspects that you set aside during the morning's inspection. You write a brief description of each type, noting the estimated weight loss for the clipped coins and the method of detection for the plated ones, using the standard phrases that the Treasury regulations require. The language is plain and free of any comment or opinion, a simple statement of fact. How many coins were found irregular, what tests were applied, and what the results showed. You record the total number of irregular pieces and their approximate silver value, a number that is very small compared to the overall collection, and you note that these coins have been wrapped in a separate sealed bundle for the smelter. The writing of this section takes less time than the others because the numbers are small and the descriptions are formulaic, and you move through it with the same steady pace, the stylus never pausing for more than the moment it takes to dip the point in the waste wax and clean it on the rag. Now you must check the entire record against the original tallies, a verification process that you perform with slow methodical attention, reading each number from the formal record and then finding its corresponding tally mark on the earlier page. You touch each mark with the point of the stylus as you count, your lips moving again in that almost silent murmur, and you work from the top of the page to the bottom, column by column, category by category. The verification reveals no errors, the numbers are consistent, and you make a small notation at the bottom of the page, a simple symbol that means checked and confirmed. The wax around the notation is slightly softer than the rest because of the warmth of the afternoon, and the stylus sinks a little deeper, leaving a darker line. The final section of the formal record is the summary, a short paragraph in clear official language that states what has been done. You write that the collection from the third market day of the month has been counted, weighed, wrapped, and sealed in the presence of the undersigned clerk, that the totals are accurate to the best of your knowledge, and that the sealed bags are ready for transport to the provincial capital. The words are the same words that you write every day, the same words that every clerk in every office writes, and they carry a kind of quiet dignity in their plainness, their lack of ornament or flourish. At the end of the summary, you sign your name, the letters of your name more familiar to your hand than any others, written with a slight natural flourish that is not vanity, but simply the way your hand moves after so many years. Beneath your name, you leave a space for the procurator's counter-signature, a space that will remain blank until the courier delivers the bags and the report together. With the formal record complete, you reach for the small linen pouch of fine sand that hangs from a hook on the side of the cupboard. The sand is pale and clean, collected from the bank of the river that runs past the town, and it has been sifted to remove any coarse grains. You sprinkle a pinch of sand across the fresh writing, tilting the tablet so that the sand rolls across the wax and settles into the grooves of the letters, absorbing any excess oil and preventing the writing from smudging. You wait a few breaths while the sand does its work, and then you tilt the tablet the other way, pouring the sand back into the pouch, leaving the wax surface clean and the letters standing clear and dark. The writing looks permanent now, the raised edges of the letters sharp and defined, the whole page a tidy record of the day's work. But the day's writing is not yet finished, because the formal record in the wax ledger must now be copied onto papyrus for the permanent register, the long roll that will be stored in the procurator's archive and kept for as long as the Treasury regulations require. You close the wax ledger, setting it to one side, and you take down the papyrus roll from its shelf, a thick cylinder of pale brown sheets glued end to end, wrapped around a wooden spindle and tied with a red cord. The papyrus crackles very slightly as you unroll it, a dry papery sound that is different from the scratch of the wax, and you use smooth stones as weights to hold it open on the table, placing a stone at each corner to keep the sheet flat. The reed pen waits in its holder, a simple cylinder of clay, with holes drilled to keep the pens upright, and you select one with a tip that is not too fine and not too broad. You dip the pen into the ink pot, the pot a small glazed vessel with a narrow neck, and you wait a moment for the excess ink to drip back, watching the dark liquid slide down the reed. The ink is made of oak gall and soot, and it has a slightly bitter smell, a smell that reminds you of winter fires and the blackened corners of old manuscripts. You hold the pen at the same angle you have held it for years, the shaft resting against the side of your middle finger, the tip just touching the surface of the papyrus, and you begin to write. The reed pen makes a softer sound than the stylus, a faint brushing like wind over dry grass, and the ink flows onto the papyrus in thin, dark lines that dry almost instantly in the warm air. You copy the heading first, the date and the governor's name, and then you work down through the categories, writing the same words, the same numbers, the same summary, all transferred from the wax to the papyrus in a permanent record. The papyrus is more absorbent than the wax, and the ink sinks into the fibers, becoming a part of the material rather than sitting on its surface. Your hand moves at a slightly slower pace than when you were writing in the wax, because the reed pen requires a lighter touch and the papyrus can tear if pressed too hard, and you adjust your grip unconsciously, holding the pen with the exact pressure that experience has taught you. When the copying is finished, you set the pen down in its holder and wait for the last few lines of ink to dry, watching the wet shine fade to a matte black. You sprinkle a little sand on the papyrus as well, though the ink dries so quickly that it is hardly necessary, a precaution born of habit rather than need. After a moment, you blow the sand gently away, a soft breath that sends the grains scattering across the table, and you inspect the copy one more time, reading it through from top to bottom, comparing each number against the wax original. The records match exactly, and you feel the same quiet satisfaction you felt earlier, the sense of a task completed correctly and completely. You roll the papyrus back onto its spindle, turning the wooden rod slowly with both hands, the papyrus wrapping around itself in a tight cylinder. When the roll is fully closed, you tie it with a red cord, wrapping the cord 3 times around the middle and securing it with a simple loop knot that will hold until the courier unties it. The sealed papyrus roll you place upright in the niche where the courier will find it, next to the cylindrical leather case that will hold the daily report. The wax ledger you close, the wooden covers meeting with a soft thud, and you secure its leather thongs with a simple tie, leaving it on the corner of the table where it will wait for tomorrow. The afternoon's writing has been steady and absorbing, and your right hand has a slight tiredness in the knuckles, a familiar ache that you massage with the thumb of your other hand, working the joints one by one. The light through the window has deepened again, moving from amber toward the first hint of rose, and the shadows in the corners of the room have grown longer and darker, though the lamps still burn steadily on the table, their flames reflected faintly in the polished wood. With the papyrus roll tied and set in its niche, and the wax ledger closed on the corner of the table, you turn your attention to the small wooden tray that has been waiting patiently through the long afternoon. The tray that holds the coins you set aside during the morning's inspection. The clipped denarii, and the plated suspects, and the pieces that simply did not look or feel quite right when you held them in your hand. The tray is a shallow rectangle of oiled beechwood, divided into 3 compartments by thin slats, and in each compartment a small pile of coins rests on a square of clean cloth, the cloth protecting the wood from the irregular edges and the green patina that sometimes flakes off the oldest bronze. You draw the tray toward you across the table, the wood sliding with a low whisper, and you position it directly in the circle of lamplight, where the flame will show every detail of the metal surfaces. The office around you is deeply still now, the late afternoon having settled into that quiet hour when even the birds in the courtyard have stopped their calling, and the only sound from the street is the occasional distant creak of a cart axle or the soft slap of a single pair of sandals on stone. The 2 lamps burn with their steady flames, and the light they cast is warm and contained, a small bright world on the tabletop surrounded by the gathering dimness of the room. You settle on the stool, adjusting your position so that your shadow does not fall across the tray, and you let your breathing slow into a calm, even rhythm that matches the pace of the work ahead. You reach for a fresh cloth from the stack beside the cupboard and spread it on the table to the left of the tray, smoothing it flat with your palm so that it will serve as a clean surface on which to lay out the irregular coins for individual examination. Then you lift the first coin from the leftmost compartment, a denarius that you flagged during the morning sort, because its edge looked too sharp, too angular, not the smooth, slightly rounded rim that an honest coin should have. You hold it up to the lamplight, turning it slowly between your thumb and forefinger, and you study the edge with the careful attention of someone who has looked at thousands of coins and learned to see the small differences that matter. This denarius has been clipped, the silver shaved away from the rim in a series of small angled cuts that removed a thin crescent of metal. The cuts are old, the exposed copper core now darkened to a deep brown that almost matches the silver surface in low light, which is why the clipping did not jump out at you during the initial sort. You run the tip of your finger along the edge, feeling the slight roughness where the silver layer ends and the copper begins, and you note how the coin is no longer perfectly round, but has a faint polygonal shape, each clip mark corresponding to a flat spot on the circumference. The clipping was done carefully, probably with a small chisel and a steady hand, removing just enough silver to accumulate a profit over many coins while leaving the coin looking nearly normal at a casual glance. You place the clipped denarius on the fresh cloth and reach for the small bronze calipers that hang from a hook on the side of the tool holder, a delicate instrument consisting of two curved arms joined by a pivot pin, the tips meeting at a point when closed. You open the calipers and fit them around the coin, measuring its diameter at the widest point, and then you compare that measurement against a known good denarius from the tray of sorted coins, measuring the good coin in the same way. The clipped coin is short by about the thickness of a fingernail, a small difference that you can feel in the resistance of the calipers as you close them. This you record on a separate wax slip that you keep just for the irregular coin report, writing the estimated loss of silver and scripulae, the tiny weight units that the Treasury uses for precise accounting. The stylus makes its familiar whisper against the wax, the sound very clear in the quiet room. You pick up the next coin from the compartment, another clipped piece, and you repeat the examination, measuring and noting and setting it beside the first one on the cloth. The clipped coins are all similar, the work of a single hand or a single workshop, and as you lay them out in a row, they form a little collection of minor thefts, each one representing a fraction of a silver piece that someone somewhere siphoned away. You do not think about the person who did the clipping. That is a matter for the market overseers and the magistrates, not for a counting clerk. Your task is simply to record what you find, to measure the loss, and to set the coins aside so that they can be melted down and restruck into honest coinage. The work is dispassionate and methodical, a matter of millimeters and scripulae, and your mind stays on the surface of the coins rather than wandering into questions of motive or justice. When the clipped coins have all been measured and recorded, you move to the second compartment of the tray, which holds the coins you suspected of being plated. These pieces look almost normal at first glance. The silver surface bright and the portrait clear, but the color is slightly wrong, a little too pale, a little too bluish, and the edge shows a faint line where the thin silver foil meets the copper core. You pick up the first suspect, a denarius bearing the portrait of the current emperor, and you hold it under the lamp so that the light strikes the edge at an angle. The line of separation is visible as a hair-thin shadow running around the circumference, a discontinuity that you can just barely detect with the naked eye. You turn the coin slowly, watching the shadow move, and you confirm that the plating is complete on both faces, but fails to wrap fully around the rim, a common flaw in forged coins made by someone who lacked the skill or the patience to disguise the edge. You test the plated suspect with the bronze needle, holding the coin balanced on your fingertip and tapping it with the same light quick strike you used in the morning. The sound it makes is the dull short thud that you have learned to recognize, a sound with no ring and no sustain, the sound of two different metals vibrating against each other and absorbing the energy. You tap a known good denarius for comparison, and the clear high chime of the honest coin fills the quiet room for a brief moment before fading. The contrast is stark, and you nod slightly, the small private nod of confirmation, before placing the plated coin on the cloth and reaching for the next. The plated coins are a varied collection, some with thick silver foil that almost passes for solid metal, others with a plating so thin that the copper shows through in patches where the silver has worn away. You find one coin where the forger used a base silver alloy rather than pure copper for the core, a slightly more sophisticated deception that gives the coin a nearly correct weight and a better ring when tapped. This piece you test on the pan balance, comparing its weight against a standard denarius, and you find that it is heavier than the other plated pieces, but still lighter than the genuine article by a fraction of a scrupulum. The weight difference is small enough that it might have passed unnoticed in a busy market transaction, and you record it in the wax slip with a separate notation marking it as a sophisticated forgery rather than a simple plated piece. Beside the plated denarii, the tray holds a few bronze coins that you set aside because their surfaces were too irregular to sort comfortably with the others. Sestertii that have been damaged by fire or by long immersion in water, their patinas turn to rough crusts of green and black that obscure the designs. You handle these pieces carefully because the corrosion can flake off and leave sharp edges, and you lay them out on the cloth in a separate row. One asterius is so heavily corroded that the emperor's portrait is completely gone, replaced by a lumpy green surface that looks more like a stone than a coin. Another has a deep gouge across the reverse, a scar that might have been made by a plough blade or a dropped chisel, and the gouge has exposed the bright brass beneath the patina, a thin line of gold against the dark green. These damaged coins are still legal tender, their metal value unchanged by the surface damage, but they must be recorded separately because they cannot be neatly stacked or easily counted by the receiving clerk of the provincial treasury. You work through the damaged bronze at the same unhurried pace, turning each coin under the lamp, noting the type and extent of the damage on the wax slip. The corrosion on one is so advanced that the coin has become lighter, some of the copper having been converted into the green patina and flaked away over the years. You weigh this coin on the pan balance and find that it has lost nearly a tenth of its original mass, a significant loss for a small denomination, and you record it as underweight, to be melted down with the clipped silver. The other damaged bronzes are closer to their proper weight, and you mark them as acceptable for continued circulation, though you wrap them in a separate cloth so that the receiving clerk will know to inspect them as well. The final compartment of the tray holds a small collection of coins that you simply could not identify during the morning sort, pieces that are so worn or so foreign that their origin is unclear. There is a tiny silver coin that might be a denarius from 2 centuries ago, its portrait reduced to a featureless bump, its inscription completely gone, its edge worn smooth as a pebble. Beside it sits a bronze piece that does not match any of the standard denominations, its size between an as and a sestertius, its design unfamiliar, perhaps a coin from a neighboring province or a client kingdom that found its way into the market by accident. You study this foreign coin under the lamp, tilting it to catch the faint remains of a letter or a symbol, but you can make out nothing definitive, and after a reasonable effort you set it aside in a separate tiny pouch that will be sent to the procurator's office with a note requesting identification. The unidentified coins are so few, only 3 in total, that they barely register in the overall accounting, but the regulations require that every coin be accounted for, even the ones that cannot be named. Now you must count the irregular coins again, a verification step that you perform by lining them all up on the cloth in a single long row, spacing them so that each piece is clearly separate from its neighbors. You touch each coin with the tip of the stylus as you count, your lips moving in that soft murmur, and you check the number against the totals you wrote on the wax slip. The numbers agree, and you make a small mark at the bottom of the slip to indicate that the count has been verified. Then you gather the irregular coins from the cloth and place them into a small linen pouch, a pouch that is distinct from the others because it is tied with a yellow cord rather than the standard hemp twine, the yellow cord indicating that the contents require special attention at the receiving office. You tie the cord in a double knot and seal it with a drop of warm wax from the iron pot, pressing your signet into the wax with the same careful pressure you used on the larger bags. The seal on the yellow cord is small but clear, the standing figure and the cornucopia standing out in miniature relief. You place the yellow corded pouch beside the larger sealed bags at the back of the table, adding it to the row of bundles that wait for the courier. Then you clean the tray, wiping the compartments with a dry cloth to remove any flakes of corrosion or dust, and you return the tray to its place on the cupboard shelf where it will wait for the next collection. The fresh cloth that held the irregular coins during the inspection you fold carefully, shaking it out first over the waste pot to dislodge any tiny metal fragments, and you set it in the pile of cloths to be washed. The calipers you hang back on their hook, the testing needle goes into its slot, and the pan balance you cover with a small linen hood to keep the dust off the chains and the beam. You take up the wax slip with the irregular coin report and copy its contents into the main wax ledger, adding a short section at the end of the formal record you wrote earlier. The new section follows the same plain style, stating the number and type of irregular coins, the estimated silver loss, and the recommended disposition of each category. You write the words with the same careful strokes, the stylus moving through the softened wax, and when the section is complete, you dust it with sand, and pour the sand back into its pouch. The ledger page is now fully covered with writing, the pale wax transformed into a dense record of the day's work, and you close the wooden covers gently, the leather thongs falling into place. The afternoon has moved into its final phase, the light through the window now a deep golden rose that makes the plaster walls glow with a warmth that is almost amber. The shadows have stretched across the entire floor, and the corners of the room are in near darkness, lit only by the faint reflection of the lamp flames on the polished wood of the cupboard. You sit for a moment with your hands resting flat on the table, the wood warm under your palms, and you let your eyes travel over the ordered arrangement of sealed bags and closed ledgers. The irregular coins have been examined and recorded. The yellow corded pouch sits with its companions, and there is nothing left to sort or measure or test. The day's work is nearly complete, and the quiet that fills the office feels deeper than before, a quiet that is not empty but full of the accumulated attention of many small tasks done with care. The rose-gold light through the window has begun its slow fade toward dusk. When you rise from the stool for the final time today, your body moving with the slight heaviness that comes from hours of quiet concentration. You stand beside the table for a long moment, letting your eyes travel over the sealed bags, arranged in their neat row, the closed ledger, the wax slip with the irregular coin report, the papyrus roll tied with its red cord. Each object sits exactly where it should, the product of a day spent in patient and unhurried labor, and now these objects must be gathered together and prepared for the courier who will arrive at the first light of dawn. You roll your shoulders once, feeling the mild ache in the muscles between your shoulder blades, and then you cross to the cupboard to retrieve the leather satchel that will carry the sealed bags to the provincial capital. The satchel hangs from a peg on the inside of the cupboard door, its leather darkened by years of handling and by the oil that you rub into it every month to keep the hide supple. It is a simple design, a rectangular bag about the width of your chest and the depth of your forearm, with a flap that folds over the top and a bronze buckle that holds the flap closed. The leather is cowhide, thick and sturdy, the outer surface smooth and the inner surface left slightly rough for grip, and it carries the smell of the neatsfoot oil you use for conditioning, a smell that is faintly animal and not unpleasant. You carry the satchel to the table and set it down with the flap open, the interior a dark cavity that waits to be filled. The packing follows a specific order, an order that you have learned from long practice and that is specified in the Treasury protocols, an order designed to protect the most valuable contents and to make the receiving clerk's work as straightforward as possible. You take the sealed bags of silver denarii first, the 3 pale linen bundles with their dark wax seals, and you place them flat along the bottom of the satchel, arranging them side by side so that they form a single even layer. The silver bags are the heaviest of the collection in proportion to their size, each one a dense compact cylinder, and they settle into the bottom of the satchel with a solid finality. You press them gently with your palm to ensure they will not shift during transport, and the linen fabric gives slightly under the pressure before holding firm. On top of the silver you place the sealed bags of bronze, the larger and bulkier bundles that contain the sestertii and the asses and the dupondii. These bags are too big to lie flat in a single layer, so you stack them in an overlapping pattern, the bottom bag resting on the silver, the middle bag bridging the gap between the first and the third, the top bag completing the tier. The bronze bags are lighter than the silver in value but heavier in weight, and the satchel begins to feel substantial as you add each one, the leather straps that hold the buckle straining just slightly. You pause to adjust the position of one bag that has shifted, nudging it with the heel of your hand until it sits squarely on its neighbors, and then you reach for the smallest bundle of all. The yellow corded pouch containing the irregular coins goes on top of the bronze, where it will be immediately visible when the receiving clerk opens the satchel. The yellow cord is a signal, a visual marker that says, "Examine me first," and you tuck the pouch into a corner of the satchel so that it will not be crushed by the flap. Beside the yellow corded pouch you place the tiny bundle of unidentified coins, the 3 mysterious pieces that no one in the provincial office could name, and you add a small wax tablet with the note requesting identification, a tablet no larger than your palm that you inscribed while the sealing wax was cooling. The contents of the satchel are now all in place, and you take a moment to review the arrangement, touching each bundle in turn as you mentally check it against the manifest you will soon write. Silver on the bottom, bronze in the middle, irregulars and unidentified on top, all present and accounted for. You fold the flap of the satchel over the opening, the leather bending along the crease that years of use have worn into it, and you secure the bronze buckle, pushing the tongue through the hole and pulling the strap until it is snug. The buckle makes a soft clinking sound, the bronze of the buckle tapping against the bronze of the strap end, and then it is still. But the buckle alone is not enough for a treasury transport. The satchel must be sealed with cord and wax, so that any tampering would be immediately visible to the receiving clerk. You take a length of the leather cord from the coil you keep in the cupboard, a thin, dark cord that is stronger than the hemp twine and more resistant to cutting. You thread the cord through the hasp of the buckle, and then through the 2 iron rings set into the body of the satchel, pulling it tight so that the cord forms a continuous loop that binds the flap to the body. You tied a cord in a double knot, pulling each loop firm with a steady pressure, and you trim the excess with the iron shears, leaving 2 short tails that will hold the wax seal. The wax in the iron pot has cooled slightly during the afternoon, but it is still warm enough to pour, and you tilt the pot carefully over the knot, letting the amber liquid drip onto the leather cord and the surrounding leather of the flap. The wax spreads in a slow circle, its surface glossy and smooth, and you watch it for the few seconds it takes to begin cooling. When the surface turns from glossy to matte, you press your signet into the wax, holding it steady for the space of 2 slow breaths, and then you lift it away. The impression is clear and deep, the standing figure and the cornucopia reproduced in miniature on the dark wax, and you test the seal with a gentle prod of your fingertip. It holds firm, the wax now hard and permanent, a closure that will have to be broken to open the satchel. You lift the satchel by its strap, testing the weight with a single arm, and you feel the solid mass of the coin bags pulling against your shoulder. The courier who carries this satchel will travel with a guard and a mule, following the road that runs along the river valley to the provincial capital, a journey of 2 days that passes through 3 small towns and 1 military checkpoint. You have made that journey yourself once, years ago, and you remember the way the road climbs gradually into the hills before descending into the capital's broad plain. The thought passes through your mind gently, a brief memory that surfaces and then subsides, and you set the satchel down on the floor beside the strongbox, where it will wait for the courier to arrive. Now you must compose the daily report, the document that will accompany the satchel and that will tell the receiving clerk exactly what the satchel contains. You return to the stool and pull a clean sheet of papyrus from the stack on the shelf, a sheet that you have already cut to the standard size, about the length of your forearm and the width of 2 hands. The papyrus is a pale brown color, the surface slightly textured with the cross-hatched fibers of the reed from which it was made, and it rustles very softly as you lay it flat on the table. You weight the corners with the smooth stones, the same stones you used earlier, and you select the reed pen from its holder, dipping the tip into the ink pot with the careful motion that has become automatic. The report begins with the same heading as the wax record, the date and the consulship and the name of the governor, written in the clear, upright letters that you have used all afternoon. Below the heading you write the purpose of the document, a standard phrase that identifies it as the daily collection report from the 3rd market day of the month. The ink flows smoothly from the pen, the line it makes thin and dark and precise, and you watch the words appear on the papyrus with the quiet satisfaction that writing always brings you, the sense of thoughts becoming visible, of information taking physical form. The first section of the report states the total value of the day's collection in silver denarii, a single number that represents the combined worth of all the coins you have counted and weighed. You take this number from the wax ledger, checking it twice before you commit it to the permanent papyrus, and you write it in both words and numerals, a redundancy required by the Treasury protocols to prevent misreading. The number is a modest one, the collection from a single market day in a provincial town, but it is enough to pay a cohort of soldiers for a week or to repair a section of the aqueduct that runs through the eastern hills, and you write it without any particular thought about its ultimate use. The number is simply a number, a piece of data to be transmitted and filed. Below the total you write the breakdown by denomination, listing the quantity of new portrait denarii and old portrait denarii, the quantity of sestertii and asses and dupondii, and the converted value of each in silver. This section takes time because there are many numbers to transcribe, and you work through them methodically, reading each number from the wax record and writing it on the papyrus with the same careful strokes. The pen makes its soft brushing sound, the ink dries almost instantly in the warm dry air, and the column of numbers grows longer as you work down the page. You pause once to refill the ink pot from the small glazed jar that you keep in the cupboard, tilting the jar slowly so that the dark liquid pours in a thin stream, and then you resume writing. The next section of the report describes the irregular coins, the clipped denarii, and the plated suspects and the damaged bronzes. And here you use the same plain language that you used in the wax ledger, stating the facts without comment or interpretation. You write the number of clipped coins and their estimated silver loss, the number of plated coins and the method by which they were detected, the number of damaged bronzes and their recommended disposition. You note that these coins have been sealed in a yellow corded pouch for the smelter, and you add a short sentence requesting that the smelter's report be forwarded to your office for your records. The words are formulaic, the same words that appear on every irregular coin report, and you write them without hesitation, the phrases so familiar that your hand forms them while your mind drifts very slightly, thinking about the walk home in the fading light. The final section of the daily report is a brief note on the condition of the office equipment, a requirement that you sometimes forget and must add at the last moment. You inspect the pan balance as you write, noting that the chains are clean and the bean moves freely, and you record these observations in a single short sentence. You inspect the steelyard, running a finger along the graduated arm to check for any new scratches or bends, and you find none, and you note this as well. The abacus you shake gently to ensure the pebbles move freely on their rods, and the soft clicking sound confirms that the instrument is in good working order. All of this goes into the report, a small paragraph at the bottom of the page that will be read by the office supervisor once a month, and then filed away. When the report is complete, you read it through from top to bottom, your eyes moving slowly down the lines of text, checking each number against the wax record, and each phrase against the standard formulas. The report is accurate, the writing is clear, and you feel the same quiet sense of completion that you felt when the last seal was pressed and the last bag was tied. You sprinkle a pinch of sand across the ink, watching the pale grains settle on the dark letters, and after a few breaths you tilt the papyrus so that the sand falls away, the ink now fully dry and permanent. You roll the papyrus into a cylinder, starting at the bottom edge, and turning it upward with slow, even pressure, the fibers crackling very softly as they bend. When the roll is complete, you tie it with a linen string, wrapping the string 3 times and securing it with a simple loop knot, and you place it inside a cylindrical leather case that has been stamped with your office mark, a small image of the standing figure that matches your signet. The case is old, the leather scuffed and darkened, the stitching at the seam slightly frayed, but it closes securely with a bone toggle that you push through a leather loop. You set the case upright in the niche beside the papyrus roll, where the courier will find it in the morning. The satchel sits on the floor by the strongbox, sealed and ready. The report waits in its leather case. The wax ledger is closed on the corner of the table. The day's work is complete, and yet you do not rise from the stool immediately, because there is one more small task that long habit requires of you before you close the office for the night. You review the whole table one last time, running your hand slowly across the wood, your fingers exploring the surface for any stray coin that may have rolled under a cloth or hidden in the shadow of the scale base. The wood is smooth and clean, the grain worn into shallow valleys by years of use, and your hand moves from left to right, covering every inch of the counting area. Near the back of the table, in the narrow space between the wax pot and the tool holder, your fingers encounter a small hard shape that does not belong. You pick it up and hold it to the lamplight, and you see that it is a single small as a bronze coin that must have rolled away during the morning sort and hidden itself in the clutter of tools. The as is dark brown, worn nearly smooth, its portrait barely visible, and you turn it over in your fingers, feeling the familiar weight of the small denomination. You rise from the stool, untie the appropriate bronze bag from the satchel with careful fingers, break the wax seal with a soft crack, loosen the twine, open the linen, and nestle the stray as among its companions where it belongs. Then you retie the twine with a fresh length, drip new wax onto the knot, press your signet into the cooling amber, and return the resealed bag to the satchel, securing the satchel's own seal once more with a new cord and a fresh impression. The interruption is a minor one, and you feel no frustration at the extra work, only the mild contentment of having found and corrected a small omission before it could cause confusion at the receiving office. Now the day is truly complete. You clean the stylus, wiping its point with the rag and returning it to its groove in the wax ledger. The reed pen you dip in water from the bronze bowl, swishing it gently to dissolve the dried ink from the tip, and you wipe it dry and place it in its holder. The ink pot you cover with its lid of cork, pressing it down firmly. The tools are returned to their places, the pan balance covered with its linen hood, the steelyard hung back on its bracket, the abacus cleared of its tally and hung on its peg, the weights in their little linen bags, the calipers on their hook, the testing needle in its slot. The cupboard doors are closed and latched, the shelves inside orderly and ready for tomorrow. The office resumes its tidy emptiness, the furniture and the tools settling into the stillness of the coming night. The last stray coin has been returned to its bag, and the resealed satchel sits once more on the floor beside the strongbox, its leather surface blowing softly in the double lamplight. You stand beside the table for a long moment, letting your breathing settle into the deep, slow rhythm of a task completed, and you feel the quiet of the evening beginning to press against the shutters like a patient animal waiting to be let inside. The office around you is warm and still, the air thick with the familiar smells of oil and wax and old dust, and the shadows have grown so long that they now merge with the corners of the room, leaving only the table and its circle of light as a bright island in the gathering dusk. You know from long experience that this is the right time to begin the closing of the office, the small ritual that marks the boundary between the working day and the evening's rest, and you turn to the lamp that has been burning since early morning with a sense of approaching the final small task. You take the bronze shears from their hook beside the lamp, the same shears you used to trim the wick earlier in the day, and you hold them ready in your right hand while your left hand lifts the clay lamp carefully by its loop handle, the terracotta warm against your palm. The flame flickers slightly as the lamp moves, the oil sloshing with a faint liquid sound, and then it steadies as you set the lamp down on a clear space at the edge of the table. You lean forward slightly, bringing your face close enough to feel the gentle heat of the flame on your cheek, and you study the wick with the assessing gaze of long practice. The wick has burned down during the afternoon, its tip now a small orange ember surrounded by a thin crust of black carbon, and a very fine thread of smoke rises from it, barely visible except when it crosses the lamplight. You open the jaws of the shears and position them just above the charred end, the bronze blades glinting for an instant, and then you snip the wick in a single clean motion. The charred tip falls onto the ceramic tile that you placed beneath the lamp this morning, and it lies there glowing faintly for a moment before darkening to a fine black powder. The trimmed wick now stands fresh and clean, its tip a pale curl of unburned linen, and the flame, which had shrunk slightly at the disturbance, rises again with renewed steadiness. You set the shears down and cup your hand behind the lamp, forming a windbreak even though there is no wind, a habit from the days when you worked in a draftier office near the city gate. Then you lean forward and blow a single steady breath across the top of the lamp, your lips pursed to direct the air precisely at the flame. The flame bends sharply, stretches sideways into a thin blue spear, and then goes out with a soft puff that you feel more than hear, a tiny displacement of warm air against your face. The smoke that follows is a thin white column that rises straight up for a hand's breadth before it curls and dissipates, and the smell of the extinguished wick fills the air, a smell that is sharp and slightly bitter at first, and then immediately soft, like the scent of a candle after it has been snuffed, but gentler, less waxy, more like the smell of dry linen warmed by the sun. You watch the smoke until it vanishes, and then you set the lamp back in its place, the clay now beginning to cool, the oil inside settling into stillness. The second lamp, the smaller one you lit in the afternoon, still burns at the far end of the table, and you carry it to the window where you will extinguish it as well. But before you do, you use its light to complete the next part of the closing ritual, the closing of the shutters. You walk to the window and set the lamp on the sill, the flame illuminating the worn stone and the iron bars that hold the shutters open. The evening air that comes through the window is cooler now, carrying the first hint of the night's chill, and it brushes against your face with a freshness that wakes you slightly from the drowsy warmth of the office. You lean out just enough to look at the street below, a narrow cobbled lane that is now empty of people, the vendors long gone, the shop fronts shuttered. The only sign of life, a single cat sitting on the opposite wall with its tail curled around its paws. The sky above the rooftops is a deep, soft blue that will soon show the first stars, and the light is fading quickly, the buildings on the western side of the street already in near darkness. You take a last breath of the outside air, smelling the faint sweetness of wood smoke from some distant hearth, and then you pull the first shutter toward you. The shutter is made of heavy oak planks joined by 2 crossbars, and it moves on its iron hinges with a low resonant creak that you have heard so many times it has become a kind of evening music, a sound that tells your body the work is done. You close the left shutter first, seating it firmly against the stone frame, and you lift the iron bar from its brackets on the sill and lower it into place across the shutter, the bar settling into its groove with a solid clunk. Then you close the right shutter in the same way, the second creak matching the first, and you lower the second bar, the iron cold against your fingers. The window is now sealed, the room cut off from the outside world, and the only light left is the single small lamp on the sill, its flame reflected in miniature on the dark iron bars. You take up the small lamp and carry it back to the table, where you extinguish it with the same careful breath, the same bending and vanishing of the flame, the same thin column of smoke. Now the room is lit only by the very last of the evening glow that seeps through the cracks between the shutters, a faint amber light that is just enough to see by while you finish the final tasks. You stand in the dimness for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, and you listen to the silence of the office, a silence that is deeper than before because the small sounds of the flame, the tiny hiss of burning oil, the soft pop of a spark, are now absent. The room feels different in the near darkness, smaller and more enclosed, a quiet shell that holds the day's work inside it like a held breath. You turn to the table and gather the day's used wax slips, the small tablets that held your tally marks, and the irregular coin report. These slips are made of the same wax as the ledger, but in smaller wooden frames, and they have been written on and erased many times, the wax thin in the center, where the stylus has pressed deepest over the years. You press each slip smooth with the flat of your thumb, moving your thumb from the center outward in slow circles, the warmth of your skin softening the wax, just enough to erase the old marks. The wax becomes a blank, pale surface again, ready for tomorrow's tallies, and you stack the slips neatly and place them in the cupboard next to the fresh tablets. The motion is familiar and soothing, the feeling of the wax yielding under your thumb, the transformation of the marked surface into a clean one, a small act of renewal that you perform every evening without thinking about it. Next you gather the empty cloth sacks that held the morning's coins before you sorted them, the sacks that you folded and set aside hours ago. You pick them up one at a time, shaking each one gently over the waste pot to dislodge any tiny fragments of metal or dust that may have clung to the fabric. The sacks are soft from use, the goatskin supple and warm, and you fold them carefully, smoothing each fold with your palm, so that they will lie flat on the shelf. You stack the folded sacks in the chest beneath the window, a wooden chest with a simple latch, and you close the lid, the latch falling into place with a small click. The chest now holds the empty sacks from today and from the previous market days, a collection of fabric that will be reused again and again until the seams wear thin and the leather cracks and they must be replaced, a process that takes years. The strong box beneath the table requires your attention now, and you kneel on the flagstones to reach it, feeling the cold stone through the wool of your tunic at the knees. You check the satchel first, the sealed leather bag that holds all the day's wrapped bundles, and you confirm that its seal is intact and its strap is secure. The satchel you leave on the floor beside the strong box, where the courier will see it immediately upon entering in the morning. Then you check the strong box itself, testing the lid with a firm press of your palm to ensure it is locked. The lid does not move, the two locks holding fast, and you run your fingers over the iron bands, feeling the cool metal and the rough texture of the nail heads. The keys you return to their places, the small brass key on the cord around your neck, the longer iron key on its hook on the wall, and you note with satisfaction that both keys are secure, that nothing has been left out of place. You rise from your knees, feeling the slight ache in your joints from the movement, and you take the small broom from its corner beside the cupboard. The broom is a simple tool, a bundle of bound twigs tied to a wooden handle worn smooth by grip, and the twigs are the color of dry straw and make a faint rustling sound as you sweep. You begin at the far corner of the room and work your way slowly toward the door, sweeping the flagstones with long, gentle strokes that gather the day's dust and the few stray bits of twine and the tiny fragments of broken wax into a small pile. The dust rises slightly as you sweep, a fine pale cloud that catches the last of the light and then settles back onto the stones, and you are careful not to raise too much of it, keeping the broom close to the ground. You sweep under the table, under the stool, around the strong box, reaching into the corners with the tip of the broom to dislodge the small accumulations that gather there. When the pile is complete, a small mound of grey dust and debris in the centre of the room, you fetch the clay pot that serves as the office waste bin and sweep the pile into it with a final series of short strokes. The dust falls into the pot with a soft hiss, and you tap the broom against the rim to dislodge any remaining particles. You carry the clay pot to the back window, the small window that opens onto the courtyard garden rather than the street, and you lift the shutter just enough to reach through. The garden below is dark now, the rosemary bush a dense black shape against the grey stone of the fountain, and you pour the contents of the pot onto the ground beneath the window, the dust scattering on the soil where the rosemary roots spread. The small bits of twine and wax will break down in the rain and the sun, returning to the earth from which their materials came, and the dust will mix with the soil and perhaps help the rosemary grow, a thought that you have had before and that you find mildly pleasant. You close the back shutter, the latch falling into place, and you return the clay pot to its corner. The water in the bronze bowl that you used to wash your hands earlier in the day has grown tepid and faintly grey, and you carry the bowl to the back window as well, opening the shutter again just long enough to pour the water out onto the garden. The water makes a dark circle on the soil, the circle spreading outward and then sinking in, and the rosemary leaves near the base of the plant gleam briefly with the moisture. You close the shutter and set the empty bowl back on the table, wiping it dry with the rag that you then hang over the edge of the basin to dry overnight. The bronze is now clean and dull, its surface marked with the fine scratches of long use, and it will be ready for fresh water in the morning. You stand in the center of the dim room and perform a final visual sweep, turning slowly on your heels to check each corner, each shelf, each surf. The tools are all in their places. The cupboard doors are closed, the strong box is locked, the satchel is sealed, the ledgers are stacked, the waste pot is empty, the lamps are trimmed and cooled. The air is still and cool, the heat of the afternoon having dissipated through the walls and the roof, and the only sound is the very distant trickle of the fountain in the courtyard garden, a sound so faint that you might be imagining it. The room is ready for the night, ready for the courier who will arrive at dawn, ready for the next market day and the next collection of coins. You take your woolen cloak from the back of the stool where it has hung all day, the fabric cool and slightly stiff, and you swing it over your shoulders, settling the weight evenly across your back. The clasp is a simple bronze brooch, and you fasten it at your shoulder with the same easy motion you have used for years, the pin sliding through the wool and the catch snapping shut. The cloak wraps you in its familiar warmth, the wool carrying the faint scent of your home and the lingering traces of many days spent in this office. You pick up the linen bundle from the niche in the wall, the bundle that held your midday meal and now holds the olive pits and the cheese leaf, and you tuck it under your arm to take home for washing. Then you walk to the heavy oak door, the door you opened this morning when the light was new and pale, and you place your hand on the iron latch. Before you leave, you take one last look around the dim room. The table stands bare and clean. The cupboard is closed. The strong box waits under the table, and the air is still. The room holds the silence of a place that has been well used and well tended, a place that will wait patiently through the night for your return. You pull the door open, the hinges murmuring their low familiar sound, and you step out into the street, turning to pull the door shut behind you. The iron key goes into the lock, turns with that quiet click, and you test the handle once to be sure. The door is locked, the office secure, and you slip the key back into the pouch at your belt. The street outside is quiet now, the cobbles pale in the fading light, the sky overhead a deep blue that is darkening toward indigo at the eastern edge. The air is cool and clean, cooler than inside the office, and it carries the smells of the evening, the smoke of cooking fires, the faint salt tang of the distant sea, the earthy dampness of the stone that has begun to release the day's heat. You walk slowly along the familiar route home, your sandals making a soft, steady sound on the worn cobbles, a sound that echoes very slightly between the closed walls of the houses. There is no one else on the street at this hour, and you walk in a comfortable solitude, your thoughts as calm and slow as the evening itself. You pass the public fountain that stands at the corner of the market square, its water still trickling from the stone spout into the basin, the sound a gentle musical splash that you have heard 1,000 times. The water in the basin is dark and still, reflecting the first pale stars that have begun to appear overhead, and you pause for just a moment to look at the reflection, the tiny points of light trembling slightly on the surface. Then you move on, past the wall of the small temple with its faded painted garlands, the colors barely visible in the dusk, the figures of the gods standing in their niches with their blank stone eyes facing the street. A cat sits on the temple steps, a grey cat with a white patch on its chest, and it watches you pass with its slow, unblinking gaze before turning to lick its paw. The neighbour's doorway on the next street is dark, the family inside already settled for the evening, and you walk past it quietly, your footsteps the only sound. The street opens into a small square where a single olive tree grows in a raised stone planter, its leaves silver in the dusk, and you cross the square diagonally, your path taking you under the branches. The smell of the olive tree is faint and green, and you brush a leaf with your shoulder as you pass, the leaf rustling dryly. Beyond the square your own street begins, a narrow lane that dead ends at the old wall, and your house is the third door on the left, a door of plain wood with a small window beside it that is dark now because you have not yet lit the lamp inside. You reach your own door and lift the iron latch, the metal cool and rough under your fingers, and the door swings inward on leather hinges that make no sound. Inside the house is dark and cool, the air still, carrying the faint scent of the dried herbs that hang from the rafters, and the clean smell of the wool blankets folded on the sleeping platform. You close the door behind you and slide the wooden bolt across, the bolt settling into its bracket with a familiar thunk, and you stand for a moment in the darkness of your own home, letting the stillness of the evening settle around you. You set the linen bundle on the small table by the hearth, where you will empty it and wash it in the morning, and you remove your cloak and hang it on the peg by the door. A simple meal waits for you in the covered clay dish on the hearth, a portion of lentil stew and a heel of bread left over from yesterday's baking, and you eat it slowly, sitting on the wooden bench by the cold fireplace, the only light coming from the small oil lamp that you lit upon entering and that now burns on the mantel with a soft, steady flame. The stew is warm from sitting near the embers at the morning's fire, and it fills your stomach with a pleasant weight. The bread you dip into the broth, letting it soften before you chew, and you eat in silence, your thoughts drifting gently over the day's work without lingering on any particular moment. When the meal is finished, you rinse the bowl with water from the clay jug beside the hearth and set it upside down to dry. You prepare for sleep with the same slow, deliberate motions that have characterized the whole day, removing your sandals and setting them by the door, washing your face and hands in the small basin of water, pulling the wool blanket back from the sleeping platform. The platform is a simple wooden frame with a mattress of straw covered in linen, and it is as familiar to you as your own body. You lie down, feeling the straw shift beneath you to accommodate your shape, and you pull the blanket up to your chin. The lamp on the mantel still burns, and you watch the flame for a long moment, the small steady light that has accompanied you through the day and now accompanies you into sleep. Tomorrow the Roman tax office in its provincial town will be there again, the door of oiled oak, the iron keys, the pan balance, the counting board, the wax ledgers, all waiting in the quiet darkness. And so will you, rising with the first pale light on the eastern hills, walking the familiar cobbled street, turning the key in the lock, and beginning again. That knowledge is as reassuring and unremarkable as the slow rotation of the stars above the silent rooftops, and you close your eyes, letting the soft tide of sleep rise around you until there is nothing left but the gentle dark and the distant sound of the fountain trickling on through the night.